Hello, my dear Franken friends, and welcome to Spookyou, your one-stop shop for all things ghastly and ghoulish. I'm your host, Barnabas Vixen, and oh, it sounds like it started to rain again. I like to leave the window open and hear the water trickle down off the gargoyles outside. Hope that doesn't bother you. Anyways, tonight we wanted to do something a bit different. You see, it's come to our attention that people actually like falling asleep to terrifying tales and gruesome stories. So, we decided to cash in on the craze and created a special series just for those slumber-seeking souls. Welcome to Spookyou's Sinister Sleepover. Tonight, there will be no sponsored breaks or interruptions. Instead, just a few hours of delectable stories to help you catch some Z's. All curated by our wicked weavers of woe. And a quick shout out to the authors who made tonight's video possible. Drunken Swordsman, MWMN19, Phone Cloth, Jam Franz, Mr. Heckin' Heck, Rococo Art is Taken, Saturdead, Daniel Bayer 1990, Trifle Tofu, South Park is Cool, Head of Spectre, and Ruzaya. And my apologies if I butchered any of those. So, make sure you're nice and tucked in, will you? I'd hate for you to go missing during the climax. Without further ado, allow me to pass the reins on over to our vivacious voiceover virtuoso for tonight's tales. And I'll be seeing all of you in the morning.
Hi, my name is Darren Reed, and over the past couple of months, I haven't been able to hold a normal sleep schedule. No matter how much I try, I just can't seem to get a hang of it. It's frustrating. I've tried most everything. Energy drinks, forcing myself asleep, everything you can think of, I've done. And I've always fallen asleep and woken up well after the day is over. I need a better sleep schedule, as my roommate, Nick Robin, is kicking me out if I don't get a job and start paying my share of the rent. So, I've come up with an idea. I'm going to scare myself awake. You might think I'm stupid or crazy, but this is my last option. Either this or homelessness, and I prefer having a house. I don't know how I'm going to do it, since I'm not spooked all too easy, but for now, I'll try looking at some spooky images and hoping it works. Maybe I'll be too paranoid to go to sleep. Who knows? Day 2. Darren here. So, yesterday I decided to look at some spooky, scary images to see what would happen, and it worked. Kinda. I woke up around 8 p.m. and conked out at my desk around 10 a.m. I admit, there was improvement there. Usually I get in my bed to sleep, but I'd been a bit spooked, so I didn't move to my bed for fear of something behind me, though I knew it couldn't have been. The only two people in the house were me and Nick. The dream I had was the weird bit, though. I was in a large, empty room with faint and muffled orchestra music in the background. The floors were wood, and the wallpaper was mostly barren, with a painted, horizontal strip that had some sort of eye-like pattern on it. As I moved, I noticed the eyes would follow me. I didn't question this since, get this, I knew I was dreaming. Yeah, somehow I knew. I tried to do something with my new lucid powers, but alas, I wasn't able to do much. But hey, cool. I can lucid dream when I look at spooky images. I bet none of you can do that. Day 3. Heyo, Darren here. I had another lucid dream again last night after checking if I could do it again. Well, now we know it works. I ended up just flying around in dream world for a while before eventually I ran into a tree and woke up. As I blinked my eyes open and started to look around, I began to realize something. I couldn't move. I began to panic, but calmed down once I remembered something. Sleep paralysis. That exists. this was just a normal night still, and I'd be able to get up any moment. Though, as I looked around and my eyes adjusted to the dark, I noticed something in the corner of my room. A pitch-black, humanoid-looking figure just standing there, looming tall almost to the ceiling. I tried to stay calm. I mean, this was just a normal side effect of sleep paralysis. Any second now, I'd fall back asleep. And I did. Nothing really happened after that, just regular old sleep paralysis. Nothing I should have been so panicked over, right? Day 4. What's up? Darren here. I decided to increase the spook factor of the images I was looking at. Maybe think up some scenarios on the side to really keep me on edge. Keep me from going to sleep before a normal time. And it didn't work. Well, kind of. Instead, when I fell asleep, I had another dream. Not a lucid one, but it was interesting. I remember sitting in a dark and empty room. The same room that I'd been in during my first lucid dream. The eyes on the walls were the same from what I could tell. Always following me. Always watching. And I remember that during the dream I had felt a looming, large presence behind me, but my body wouldn't let me turn around. The thing was just inches behind me, and I could feel it, but I couldn't do anything about it. All of a sudden, I felt hands wrap around my neck, and I jolted back into consciousness, only to still be in my room, laying in bed, and, yet again, unable to move. Well, at first this was cool, but by now I was getting over it. As I glanced to the corner, I saw, yet again, the black figure looming in the corner. I wasn't worried. I mean, after all, it's just a hallucination, and what's it gonna do? Stab me or something? I rolled my eyes just thinking about it. And after a bit of trying to fall asleep again, I opened my eyes to see that the hallucination in the corner had opened its eyes to reveal large semicircles of white on its pitch black face. Huh. Weird. I wonder why it never did that before. Anyways, then I went back to sleep. No more dreams, but I'm a little more spooked now, so let's see what happens. Day 5. Hi, Darren here. Sleep paralysis has been getting to me recently, and so has the spooky images. Sometimes I'll see things out of the corner of my eye that aren't there, or hear something that isn't there. It's mainly just whispering or little ringing noises that keep me on my toes. I'm grateful for it, in a way. That way it's easier to stay awake when I need to. Me, 1. Ominous whispering, 0. Today I had to take Nick to the ER. Something to do with his dairy allergy, so I woke up a little earlier than usual, which is good. I mean, now I can start easing into sleeping earlier. On a side note, I didn't have any dreams last night or sleep paralysis, which is good. I didn't miss that freaky pitch black thing. I guess this is mostly filler update. Not like you guys need to know about Nick going to the hospital. Day 6. Sup, Darren here. Can't exactly remember my dream from last night, but I do know that whatever's been happening to my brain since yesterday, it's getting worse. I know that none of it can be real, but I've been hearing more things. The whispers are becoming clearer, but the only things I've been able to recognize are absolute gibberish. And I'm seeing things more often. Eyes. Pitch black hands just out of my field of view. That same wide-eyed and inky black figure peering at me from inside my closet. All sorts of things like that. And I know that none of them can be real, since these kind of pitch black beings don't exist. There's no way they can exist. None of this is real. But I can't help but wonder, what if it is? Seven. Darren here. My strategy's working. I've been falling asleep earlier and earlier every day, and get this, I managed to wake up at 5 p.m. today. Improvement, people. Seems like I won't have to do this for much longer, which is good because I think this spooky images thing is driving me insane. The whispers, from what I can tell, are nothing more than just gibberish, no matter how clear they get. It's always just random mumblings of a crazy man or something, and the seeing things part of it, it's only getting worse too. I've started noticing random, unexplainable things. Seeing bruises on my arms that just can't be actual ones. Seeing more eyes, more of the same goddamn shadow monster dude. And you know what solidified that I'm going insane? I had sleep paralysis again last night. As I blinked my eyes open and checked my surroundings, I saw the shadow monster dude in the corner again, eyes wide and glaring down at me. I sighed, looking the monster directly in the eyes. And as I looked at it, it began to stretch its mouth into a wide grin, showing off its shiny teeth and the pitch black of the rest of its body. As I scanned the face of the creature, I felt the urge to move my fingers, and though I knew that I wouldn't be able to, I tried anyway. And it worked. This isn't just some sleep paralysis thing. This is something else. It can't be real. I mean, nothing like this exists in nature, in anywhere, really. It has to be something else. I have to be going insane. God, please never try this. 8. Darren here. Today I woke up at 3 p.m. Improvement, huh? Nice. As I went to the kitchen to get myself something to eat, I saw Nick grabbing the jug of milk from the fridge. Here, I roughly transcribed the combo from what I can remember. Whoa, dude, don't you have a dairy allergy? What? Yeah, I had to take you to the ER over it, like a couple of days ago. Oh, I know, I'm just making something for you. You say so, bud. Needless to say, that was strange. Nick is deathly allergic to dairy, and plus he never does anything for me. I mean, I had to practically beg him to be roommates in the first place. So why is he all of a sudden making something for me? Nah, I don't buy it. I feel like there's something weird going on here. This isn't normal. 9? Had another night of sleep paralysis last night. As I blinked my eyes open and took in my surroundings, I saw the shadow monster dude, standing ever so silent in the corner as his gaze stayed fixated on me, his grin never faltering, eyes never moving. After a while of looking at him, my spot on the bed was getting uncomfortable, so I rolled over. As I noticed what I had just done, I heard something from the corner where the creature was. "You look so comfortable," it said, its voice sounding whispery and distorted and definitely inhuman, like some kind of AI-generated thing. "What?" I asked, sitting up on my bed to look at the thing before me. My mind was racing with a million questions, but I had to stay calm. This wasn't real, I was sure of it. This wasn't real. "You look comfortable in your bed," it whispered back, pausing for a while before speaking again. "Why don't you come closer?" I don't," I sputtered out, glancing away from the creature in front of me. "Come closer," the being spoke, its voice more demanding. I paused. My mind was so clouded with the thought that this was just a dream or a hallucination that I obliged, getting up from my bed and walking closer to the being, despite my fear. "Good." Its grin widened as it spoke. "You have little time left, Darren Red." I'm sorry, what?" I asked, having to look up at the tall monster. And then, The thing that proved that I wasn't insane despite all my thoughts. The creature grabbed my shoulder. My breath hitched as I felt the long claws digging into my skin through my hoodie, most definitely leaving cuts.
Pay attention to Nick Robin,
the thing spoke.
You two are bound to the chains of fate, for he has chosen this for you.
And before I could respond, the creature was gone. Disappeared. I was just facing a corner, and I was left with the realization that what I had seen was real. All of it was real. I still felt the pain in my shoulder from where its claws had dug into my skin and cut me, and my hoodie was ripped. This all was real, and I had to face it. If anyone has experienced anything like this and you live near Lane, please contact me at gmail.com. Thanks. Oh, I'm so excited. I mean, we could do each other's hair. You could paint my nails, give me a mani-pedi. I don't know. We could gossip about, I don't know, monsters and mayhem. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Do you think you could French braid my fur? Like, would that be too hard, or is like, do you think it would look okay? When I first arrived at university, my student card didn't work and was devoid of any information. Someone on campus had mistakenly directed me to the lead IT technician of the university to fix this. And I should have just gone to the main reception, I found out afterwards. However, the head of IT was willing to help and, whether through accident or laziness, gave me access to every electronically locked door on the university grounds. To the constant amusement of my friends, I've yet to find a door that I can't swipe open with my card. I developed an odd hobby in my third year. I began sneaking around the university at night. I'd wander around for hours looking for unknown, hidden, and restricted rooms just for the thrill of it. This was only possible with the help of my keycard, of course. And I experienced one of the most breathtaking moments of my life the first time I did this. It happened when I broke into the biology and chemistry's laboratories during an intense full moon. The ghostly light caressed conical flasks, brought glowing agar jellies to life. Light swam across waxy plant leaves, bounced off metallic instruments, and made halos around every test tube. The haunting beauty left me utterly speechless, and no pictures I took even came close to what it felt like. The experience perpetuated this hobby to the point of obsession. Now, by that time, I had heard the same stories and reoccurring conversations in my friendship group, and my nighttime escapades became the only thing that gave me a sense of excitement. This feverish habit continued harmlessly for some weeks until it came to a sudden end due to an odd series of events. After which, I vowed never to do it again. Now, I'll try my best to only tell the facts in my story, in the hope that someone out there might be able to make sense of what happened and perhaps even shed some light on the hideous incident. It all started one evening when I was walking up a stairway during one of my break-ins. The evening's scarlet light spilled upon each step and washed onto walls. I was heading towards a place called the Tower Room. Now, I'd just discovered its existence in a hidden alcove behind the entrance foyer, which was odd, especially considering that it was located within my college. College in the British sense, a site of accommodation with its own identity, services, and administration. I knew my college well, from the bar to the laundry room and everything in between, but never heard of this place before. What characterized my college was a remnant of a historic tower that stood in the center of the building, presumably part of the original college. I concluded that this stairwell led to the old tower and was overcome with excitement. As I climbed the stairs, I found a secret passageway which led to the back of the college bar. I couldn't wait to tell my friends about this. I stopped on the 3rd floor to look at an old metal sign that was painted black with a white border. The white lettering read, College Library, 3rd floor. I was confused how there was even space for a library in such a small historic tower. I turned off and stood in front of a room named Seminar Room A6.C, which was written on a plaque beside the door. This plaque had been placed over a previous plaque that was no longer there, judging from the unfaded wall paint behind it. There were raw plugs in the wall, presumably for screws that held up the previous sign. This must have been where the old library was. It had an electronic lock, so I swiped and walked in. The ceiling was low. The room was perhaps 3 by 3 meters with 3 floor-to-ceiling windows that cast the red light across the floor. This place was clearly forgotten by any refurbishments because the computer and projector were extremely dated. There were multiple tables in the center of the room with some scratching on them, and someone had left a white and blue hoodie hanging on the back of a chair. There was a buzz of forgotten energy, like walking through an ancient cave with wall paintings made by long-lost ancestors. I circled around the room, and suddenly I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner was a dead rook, similar to a raven but with a long curvaceous beak. The size and stillness of the bird shocked me. The windows were fixed, so the bird couldn't have got in there by itself. Did someone bring the dead bird to this room? Maybe it got stuck inside and died up here. But someone had to let it through the security door. Weird. Especially as there was no sign of how it died. It looked remarkably fresh. Its sable feathers were both beautiful and macabre. Its eyes were open, glistening in the red sunset. I couldn't help but be transfixed by those black, haunting eyes, and I began to imagine what swirling dreams within dreams they might have seen in its life. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked for any other clues, but there was nothing. It felt strange leaving this dead rook in a seminar room, but what was I going to do with it? I couldn't report it. There'd be questions about my trespassing, and it's pretty unhygienic to carry it anyway. I suppose that I would just leave it to the next person who comes in. So I left and returned to the stairwell once again. I eventually reached the 5th floor. The university sat on a hill, so from this height, you could see crimson light draped over the town below. The cathedral looked particularly spectacular, with its Gothic architecture appearing as if it came straight out of some horror film. I came to a small hallway with 4 doors, one called the plant room, which was propped open by a hoover and filled with boilers and faucets, and on the opposite side were 2 other rooms which were named A6.8 and A6.B. I thought I heard someone showering from A6.B, but when I got closer, I realized it was far more violent than that. It was like water slapping out of a drain pipe during torrential rain. The sound startled me. Why was it coming from an internal room on the highest floor of the building? Moreover, there had been nothing but sunshine for days. The door was shut with a physical lock, so I couldn't get in with my keycard. Room A6.8 was also locked in the same way, but silent. And at the end of the small hall was a 4th room, which was left open. The tower room. It was like the old library room. Low ceiling, old projector, 2 floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked an ugly bitumen flat roof. The hazy red sunset looked quite ominous in here, but nothing was that odd. It was just some dull seminar room. I moved closer to some tables and saw the same scratchings that were in the old library room. It was some sort of Latin, but I couldn't understand it. I wandered around for a bit, and I wondered if this would make a nice secret hideout, an unknown corner of the university to myself. I could come up here to study if I wanted to. Perhaps even watch some films from the projector in the evenings. I decided to see if the old projector worked. It appeared to be linked up to an old university computer. I flicked the switch for the projector, and the most horrendous scraping and whirring sound occurred for a couple of seconds, and then I heard a metallic click. The luminescent lens of the projector lit up, and the light flooded out gently. It illuminated the dust in that charming way projectors do. It seemed to work, and the computer's startup screen was displayed onto the wall. I went over to the computer, but when I started using the mouse, I noticed that it wasn't working properly. It was as if it was fighting back, as if someone else was controlling it. Momentarily, I wrestled with it, but it soon began behaving normally. I thought nothing of it, and I put my university login credentials in. I thought I'd put on a short YouTube video to see if the sound worked. I sat back on one of the chairs with my feet up on the desk and waited for the ads to roll on by. The ads were normal and the sound seemed to work well, but when the video started, it was just blank. A luminous blackness stained the room. I was about to get up to check the computer when all of a sudden, a vague reference of a face and shoulders appeared within the blackness of the video. I leaned forward in my chair. It was a person, and I could just about see the glints of their eyes. But the lighting of the video was so bad, it was hard to understand what was going on. I mean, they were moving unnaturally, looking drugged or restless. This was not the YouTube video I'd clicked on. I suddenly felt an extreme sense of distress, like a scalpel in my stomach. Who is this? What sick fuck would film them like this? But this feeling was nothing compared to what I felt next. I slowly got up from my chair when I started to recognize the figure in the video. The figure within the darkness. It was me. It was my own face.
Why are you here?
Seethed a voice like broken glass.
You've come in my room.
I now understand what rigor mortis feels like. All the tendons in my body contracted and stiffened. I managed to stagger towards the computer and the voice returned.
Why are you here?
It shrieked.
Why are you in my room?
A juxtaposed melodic voice followed with,
I see you.
I ripped the computer plug from the wall. The room cut back to silent eeriness. The sunset was the only source of light once again. Suddenly, a rook cawed loudly on the other side of the window, hopping about on the flat roof, staring into the room with black pearly eyes. This was too much. What the fuck is going on? I ran to the door, but it was locked. It had a mechanical key lock like the other rooms of the floor, so I couldn't swipe myself out. I furiously shook and turned the handle, but it was no good. It was locked from the outside. I've explored the university a lot recently, and I never had anything like this before. I started pleading internally. This was my own fault. If I'd just hung out with my friends in the evenings like a normal person, I wouldn't be in this mess. My phone had no signal, and the university Wi-Fi didn't seem to reach up here. It was 9:37 p.m. at this point. What was I going to do? Although freaked out by the video, I tried to turn the computer back on in an attempt to contact someone, but it had a startup error message that only led me in circles. It needed a university administrator to sort it. I was shaking in fear and anxiousness. The hazy yellow streetlight flickered on and cast vague shapes across the room. I wasn't sure whether my vision was going blurry, but everything began to seem vague and distant. I felt tired. So tired. I was shaken up and felt sick, but before I could make it to a chair, a weakness came over me, and I crumpled to my knees, as if I was a paper cup under someone's foot. My thoughts turned into alphabetic spaghetti. Nothing was coherent or made any sense, and my eyes kept shutting like elevator doors. I collapsed, and in a couple of seconds, I blacked out. When I woke up, there were sharp wedges of light that cut inside the room from the streetlights. Slowly, my thoughts started to come together to make words, then sentences, and then fully formed ideas. I checked my phone, and it was 3:26 a.m. What the hell happened? Did I just have a panic attack and pass out? I felt groggy as I started to pick myself up. I hadn't realized that there was a book underneath one of the tables. The title was Dissecting Birds, a Beginner's Guide by Dr. P.L. Hargreaves. It had notes all over the pages, diligently written and relating to passages within the book. It appeared someone had been practicing this from the detailed nature of the notes. However, as I flicked through the pages, the notes became more erratic, turning from cursive pencil notes to unrecognizable scribblings and then finally deranged scratchings. One of the last pages of the book had its corner turned. "Why are you here?" it read on the left page. "He's in my room," on the other. It was written over and over across the book's text and diagrams. I was mortified. My heart started pounding. Even in my drugged-like state, I forced myself to clamber to my feet. And I noticed that fucking rook was still outside, slowly turning its head to watch me. But I wasn't wasting any time. The first thing I did was try the door handle, and to my unfathomable relief, it opened. I peered out through a crack in the door. I could hear an odd noise from room A6.B again. But it was different now. I thought it was someone brushing their teeth, but it was more like brushing a patio with a wire brush. I just wanted to go to my own room. I didn't care at this point. I had enough of exploring. Fuck this. I'm going back to seeing friends and continuing my normal life. None of this exploring shit. I ran straight past the hallway and sprinted down the stairs. My accommodation was in the same college as I mentioned before, so I got back within minutes. When I got to my room, I tried to suppress my breathing and calm down. I could hear my flatmate talking in an adjacent room through the thin apartment walls. She was an exchange student from the USA and often called her family at odd hours. I do my best not to listen to her conversations out of courtesy, but adrenaline does odd things to you. I couldn't stop myself picking up everything she said. She was having a normal conversation, talking to some friend about nothing in particular. And it sounded like her friend had just come back from a night out by the sound of what they were saying. My heart rate was beginning to slow, and I sighed. Then, all of a sudden, there was a low scratching noise, as if a screwdriver was carving a message into the other side of the plaster wall. "Hey, why are you here?" she said cheerily, but it was still as if she was addressing her friend on the phone. She went on, I know, he's in my room." I stood motionless with my eyes wide open. Everything was silent for a bit, but my heart was pounding at full pelt. There's no way that was a coincidence. All of a sudden, she growled accusingly through the wall. "Why are you here? Why are you in my room?" I don't know if I was imagining this or not, but I wasn't going to stay to find out. Grabbing my laptop, bag, and keys, I bolted through the door and marched outside. I looked back to see light seeping out from behind the curtains of my roommate's window. I thought I saw her face appear from behind the glass. I turned back around and made my way to the library. I didn't even care if I slept or not. I was convinced that I had had a panic attack and just passed out or something. I couldn't justify it any other way. As weird as everything was, nothing serious had happened to me, so ringing someone at this time of night felt ridiculous. I just sound insane. I'd call a doctor tomorrow in the light of day. A security guard walked lazily around the perimeter of the library. As most students know, there are always insomniacs who inhabit a 24-hour library too. Perhaps if things get worse, I could ask for help, I thought. But when I got in, I knew no one in here was willing to have a conversation. They wandered around like ghosts, with desk-light eyes, dead and nocturnal. So, I just stalked the library for a desk that I was comfortable with. I opened my laptop and started playing a show on Netflix, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind was racing with everything, and I felt quite paranoid. The windows gave an intermittent knocking sound, as windows do when they contract in the coolness of the night. But each knock received my immediate and undivided attention. When I focused on the pitch-black windows, I thought I could see an outline of a face appearing, but couldn't make anything out. I felt exhausted, and I wondered if I was becoming delirious. Anything beyond the window was impenetrable within the lighted context of the library. I mean, how could I see anything? An email notification pinged loudly. I had an unread message from the tower room at university.ac.uk. My stomach instantly dropped. "Where did you go?" it read, with no greeting or email signature. Seconds later, an additional email appeared, and as I began to read it, I felt like I was hurtling to the bottom of the ocean floor. "Why did you go into my room? The technician gave me that room. Why did you go in there? It's mine. Mine, not yours. What were you doing in there? It's mine. The technician gave it to me. That's my room. Why did you go in there? Where did you go? There was someone in my room. Can you tell someone? Do you know what he did to me? Why were you in my room? You know Daddy gave it to me." I slammed my laptop shut. Every synapse in my brain fired at once. I fell into a state of mania. I started flinging things into my bag, and then I paced around forcefully. Needless to say, my erratic behavior attracted the attention of a student at the other end of the room. I needed to prove that this wasn't happening. I wanted to see if anyone was behind this window. I went to the window, and I clamped my hands against it so I could see outside. There was no one there, but there was something. It was a rook that stood like a statue in the abyss of the night. It turned to look at me. I staggered back away from the window in horror. In the reflection of the glass, I looked pale with bloodshot eyes like a patient from a mental institute. Suddenly, red writing filled the entire window. "Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here?" As if written by a million tiny hands. The fear and anxiety I experienced was like a scalpel in my stomach. I let out a noise that I had never heard myself make before. It wasn't pain or shock. It came from the bottom of my gut, slowly gurgling out. It was pure fear. I needed help. I didn't care if the guy on the other end of the room had been watching me. I just needed help. I paced over to him, and of course he saw me coming. He grew into a state of fear, grabbing his laptop and standing up. No, what the fuck? Just fuck off, the student shouted. "Leave me alone! I'm not fucking joking!" His eyes were fixed on my right hand. When I looked down, I saw that I was clenching a scalpel and that my right hand was covered in thick, dark blood. With all my strength, I tried to say something, but I just couldn't get any words out. He ran off, leaving his laptop cable and books. I just stood there, drinking everything in. I hadn't slept all night, possibly drugged, and had been pumping out adrenaline for an hour or two now. I could feel my heart beating irregularly, and was swaying as I staggered around. What was happening to me? I must have gone insane because when I looked down again, there was no scalpel or blood on my hands. But why did he run off then? I was confused beyond the point of processing it. I shuffled back to my desk and sat there in silence, desperately trying to figure out what to do. I could have collected my thoughts if it wasn't for the library lights. They were so surgical and sterile. I started to feel nauseous as I got flashbacks of dissecting frogs at school. I'm not sure why it hadn't affected me before, but I tried to ignore it. It was no use, though. I couldn't bear it for a second longer. I ran outside with the urgency of someone who was about to vomit, and as soon as I pushed through the doors into the cool outside air, I instantly felt better. The night breeze stirred quietly, and the clouds obscured the moon, giving the sky an inky glow. It was calm and gentle out here. The only noise was the security guard pacing around. I collapsed on a bench and waited there. I didn't sleep. I simply sat there staring at my feet, just trying to make sense of everything. I did this until the faintest hum of daylight appeared on the horizon. It was still nighttime, but the first signals of daybreak gave me hope. I started to look around in a slight daze when something caught my interest. I couldn't tell why, but I kept staring into one of the adjacent buildings. It had glazed curtain windows in the ground floor entrance foyer, and I kept trying to make out impressions of chairs, tables, and columns. But to my horror, I realized there was a figure within the building. It had been looking at me all this time. A prickling metallic taste filled my mouth. They were alone, in the darkness, wearing a blue and white hoodie. An uncontrollable trembling came over me. Whether it was reality or imagination, the figure slowly retreated into nothingness. I was so sick of this. I just needed to survive until daybreak. I heard scratching. It was similar to the scratching I heard in my bedroom before. I felt trapped, and like a bear prowling around in my stomach, every fiber in my body was telling me to run, or hide, or perhaps fight. Then, out of nowhere, a rook flung itself at me from the veil of darkness. It was possessed with the fury of a tiger. I panicked and I tried to protect myself the best I could, but this bird was extremely violent, intentionally attacking my eyes with its piercing beak. With one particular stab, it got deep into my eye. I believed it had blinded me. I yelled out in pain and an unstoppable rage came over me. A rage strong enough to kill this fucking bird beyond the point of any humanity. Despite its beak and claws, I grabbed the foul bird by the neck, and in a fight for its own life, the rook ravaged my hand with all the strength it had, leaving cuts all over my arms. All the while, I pulled out a scalpel, clenched it in my fist, and cut the bird's chest in a slow but thick stroke. Guts and entrails erupted from the dying bird, covering both my hands in thick, dark blood. The rook croaked horrifically and quickly stopped moving. I smiled, and even began to laugh at the pure absurdity of what just occurred. I looked up, and in a millisecond's glance, a spectral ghost looked back in the reflection of the library window with yellow blotched skin, a hospital gown, and blood coming from its mouth. Somewhere deep inside me, if I'm being honest, was a flicker of enjoyment from cutting the bird open. I heard steps running towards me. It was security. I grabbed the bird and ran in the opposite direction. I didn't have time to think, but instinctively I knew the guard finding out was a terrible idea. He might report it to the university, and what the fuck would I do then? If I ran immediately, I had a chance to get away with it at the very least. I ran with fear and rage, every muscle in my body pushing me forwards with this dangling bird still in my fist. No one was about on campus, and I couldn't hear or see the security guard follow me. Most likely, he was investigating the scene and the distressing amount of blood left on the floor. I ran to my college dorm. I needed to get away from this. I didn't care. I started croaking air into my lungs as I continued. I was possessed. I felt I was escaping from the sun's dawning rays. Baffled and crying, I finally reached my college entrance in total delusion. Why then? Why did I run towards that staircase? Why did I start stumbling up the stairs to the tower room? Why did I stay up there for days on end? I lost all memory. It was 10 days before security found me living there in that tower room. When the first guard came in, I leapt out and grabbed him in a hellish grip. I looked at him like a prisoner who hadn't seen light in 10 years. With both my hands on the straps of his security vest, I dragged him down with my body weight. I tried to push words out of my mouth like forcing a large log through a chipper. All that came out was blood that rolled down my chin and neck. The police report only quoted 2 unintelligible phrases from me. Why are you here? Why are you in my room? There's nothing better than a dark, stormy night, some terrifying tales, and just a couple of people hanging out together for a sleepover. I love it. Who I am is not important. All you need to know is this. For the past 5 years, I've been part of the NASA team that looks after the Voyager 1 probe as it travels further and further away from the Earth. We have helped keep it functional for decades after its expected lifetime, and at a distance of 14.5 billion miles away from Earth, it really is a marvel of human engineering. Now, if you're interested in our work, you've probably read in recent news about the unexplained malfunctions that the craft has been suffering from. It's true that the probe is experiencing difficulties, but that's not even half of it. God, it's not even a malfunction at all. Blame the government suits for that lie. The probe's orientation in space is managed by a system called the AACS, which stands for Attitude, Articulation, and Control System. Now, normally, the AACS makes sure that the Voyager has its antenna pointed to Earth so that it can both send and receive signals. That's how we get the data the probe collects, and that is how we make sure it'll stay functional for as long as possible. 2 weeks ago, we started receiving information about the AACS that simply could not be true. We checked, then double-checked, but there was no mistake. The data we were getting contained a single, confounding piece of information. The probe had stopped. It was, to put it simply, hanging motionless in space. We scrambled to find the source of the error. Had the AACS broken down, sending us flawed information? Was it some other system that had broken? Thankfully, the fault protection software hadn't triggered. That would have shut down all but the most essential functions of the probe. As it was, we could run all the tests and diagnostics we needed. No one considered even for a second that the readings were correct. That would be ludicrous. But day after day, we found nothing. As far as we could see, there was no malfunction at all. Nothing had broken or gone wrong. For all we could tell, the AACS was working just fine and the probe was, indeed, just hanging in space. NASA higher-ups berated us and told us to look again. "Probes just don't stop," they told us. "There's something we're missing here. There has to be." A monotonous, unfulfilling week followed. More tests, more diagnostics, same result every time. In desperation and at our wits' end, we attempted to instruct the probe to rotate or start moving again. The thrusters complied, but the Voyager remained stubbornly in place. Our approach to the situation changed. We shut down all the systems aboard the Voyager and, going one by one, switched them back on and checked their functionality down to the smallest detail, only moving on to the next after we had made absolutely sure that they were running without any issues. Then, a breakthrough. Without our prompting, the onboard plasma wave instrument, essentially a sensor that detects waves of electrons in the interstellar space that the probe travels through, had switched back on and begun sending data to us. Understandably, this caused quite a stir. Equipment turning on and off on its own accord, now that was a problem. There was a feeling of doom in the air. Suddenly, the idea of losing the Voyager 1, after so many decades, seemed all too real. The data from the plasma wave instrument can be listened to, since the waves it detects take place on frequencies that the human ear can detect. Naturally, we decided we should listen to whatever recordings it had sent back. Now, from the very beginning, the data was bizarre. Normally, the sound of the plasma wave instrument is a monotonous, eerie hum, the background noise of the interstellar void. The recordings we received was nothing like that. Rather, it was a series of rapid spikes, a bleeping, wailing sound, irregular, punctuated by bouts of almost silence. Our team was dumbfounded. What did it mean? Another faulty reading? A space anomaly? At this point, we were coming to terms with losing the probe altogether. I guess it wasn't that far-fetched. Voyager 1 was operating decades past its expected lifetime. It had always been a possibility that it would simply break down one day. As we sat in the listening room, pondering and arguing, one of my colleagues, a genius and one-time child prodigy named McKinley, suddenly sat up straight. I looked over at him. His face was wrapped with fascination.
God above? I've got it! It's Morse code!
There was a second of silence.
Ridiculous, someone sneered from across the room. How could it? Listen to it, McKinley insisted. The spikes, the punctuation, the breaks, it's Morse, I tell you.
He grabbed a paper and pencil and began playing the recording back again, mumbling under his breath. P-E-R-A. After a few minutes, he sat up and lifted the paper into the air.
Per aspera ad astra,
he declared victoriously. The room exploded with frantic activity, people shouting over each other, asking questions, voicing confusion, drawing hypotheses. That phrase,
per aspera ad astra was known to us all. When the Voyager probes were launched, NASA attached something called the Golden Records to them. A phonograph record meant as a message to any extraterrestrials they might encounter out in the void. The records contained everything from music to the sounds of nature to recorded greetings in 55 languages. And last but not least, there was a Morse code message. Per aspera ad astra. Through hardship to the stars. A motivational quip sent to our interstellar neighbors. More recordings came in, even as we argued among ourselves. These recordings were impossible. They couldn't be real. We were receiving all the sounds stored on the Golden Records, distortedly played back to us through the readings of the plasma wave instrument. Birdsong, music, even the sound of Carl Sagan's son saying hello. With each reading, the room grew more quiet, more subdued, as the truth dawned on us all. Someone, something out there was listening to the Golden recording. And then the AACS went haywire. Suddenly, there was movement where, just a second before, there had been none. Our systems were flooded with locational data, and my heart plummeted as I realized what was happening. The Voyager had started moving again, at speeds no human creation should be capable of. It was hurtling through space, and it was heading back towards Earth. I understand now. I understand why this is happening. The recordings aren't the only thing on that disc. There's so much more. Diagrams of human biology, of our culture, of the solar system. Dear God, it all leads right back to Earth. Fear. It's an intrinsic part of life. It's a mechanism that enables us to survive and avoid potential dangers. The fear of heights, arachnophobia, megalophobia, and various other fears and phobias can be explained logically as being remnants of our early evolution. They still do their job today, though in some instances it doesn't do us any good. We pride ourselves in being able to explain everything, being able to reason ourselves out of the fear of the unknown. We'll find out more one day, we say to ourselves, but the thing is, almost all of our fears are about something. Of course, it is something, you say to yourself. I fear nothing is a common catchphrase for many heroes in our stories. But if you stop and think for a moment, ruminate on it, nothing. We can't explain it. We fear nothingness, and we associate it with death. But we do not know what comes after death, what happens once all life functions cease, once the brain stops shooting out electrical impulses, when our thoughts and our memories simply vanish. And I don't think I need to continue. You thought about it most likely yourself. I needed to tell you this for the start, for you to better understand what I am about to tell you. It's irrelevant who found it, and it'll make no difference in the end. The person who first found out the truth about the Great Void is no longer with us. Let me begin with a brief explanation for those who are not familiar with the Great Void. There is a point in space where there is an almost complete absence of stars. I say almost because we did detect only a few stars within them. Though, looking at it better, those were merely optical illusions. Anyways, the Great Void, also known as Boötes Void, is one of 3 known supervoids in the universe, most likely more.
Those which have been observed are the aforementioned Boötes Void, the CMB Cold Spot, and the simply named Giant Void. Now, there are many theories to explain their formation, such as baryon acoustic oscillations during the Big Bang. In short, those oscillations are simply collapses of mass followed by implosions of compressed baryonic matter. And baryons are composite subatomic particles with an odd number of valence quarks. I know most of you might not know what I'm talking about. Let's just say that is the leading theory and explanation for them. And that theory still stands for most of those voids. But there's been a shift in the Boötes Void. Let me first elaborate on what we found in the Boötes Void in the last 2 years of research. That research isn't publicly available, so don't try to find it. You won't. Not even on the deep web. Believe me. But I digress. If you Google Boötes Void, you'll probably see a big black amorphous blotch among a bunch of stars. Now, that isn't the Boots Void, that is Barnard 68. It is a molecular cloud around 500 light-years from our galaxy. Imagine it is like a cloud blocking out the sun in the stars. And the cloud is 0.25 light-years in radius. But Boots Void is much, much bigger than that simple nebula. It is 330 million light-years in diameter. To put that into perspective, that is 0.27% of the observable universe. Now, 0.27% of the observable universe is nothing. 0.27% of the observable... 0.27% of the observable universe is nothing. Just nothing. That thing is 700 million light-years from Earth. I've said that there have been stars found inside it, but we've been wrong. We're not so sure for the other supervoids, but we are goddamn sure for the Boots Void. It's like a titanic black hole. I mean, it bends light around itself, and what we see are simply stars behind it or beside it. But it isn't a black hole. The thing started expanding 2 years ago. But of course, it wasn't 2 years ago. It was probably 700 million years ago. But that theory went down the drain because of a simple calculation. A calculation which I assure you we did 1,000 times at this point. And it always comes back with the same result. The thing is expanding faster than light. It's significantly faster. I mean, at our best estimates, it is about 10 times the speed of light. This means that it would take about 70 million years to reach us, give or take, and we have to put into consideration the expansion of the universe and everything else. But of course, our only way of observing it is by the stars that it had already absorbed, and those are 700 million light-years away from us. We managed to calculate the speed of the void by the rate at which the stars started disappearing. Now the thing is, we don't know where it is now, how large it is, because the light of the stars it had absorbed at this point hasn't been put out yet, completely. Their light, dead light, is still shining. And since the thing is expanding faster than the speed of light, and due to the abrupt start of said expansion, we threw out everything we knew about physics out the window. I mean, we don't know where it is, whether it's stopped, whether it's sped up or slowed down. We don't know. We are sitting ducks because the light isn't simply coming here fast enough for us to observe it in real time. I mean, for all I know, it can come here the moment I post this. It can come tomorrow, next year, or in a century.
in a billion years, for all I know. If it's anything like a false vacuum, our demise will come like an assassin in the night, without warning. We will simply cease to exist. Maybe there is something inside of it, but that something is entirely alien to us. There are theories that a false vacuum completely rewrites the laws of physics. It wipes the slate and starts anew while devouring the existing universe. Hell, what am I talking about? I don't know if that thing is a false vacuum at all. I don't know what it is. It doesn't abide by the simple law that is the speed of light. Maybe our universe is a false vacuum that is devouring a universe completely alien to us. Maybe this is just the way it is. Death will be swift. I know that. There will be nothing. Everything we do is for nothing. Because I know it will arrive. Eventually. Inevitably. And we will never know.
What was that? Did you hear that? Oh, okay. That was your foot pumping the fan. No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm not scared.
It's time something is addressed. Many, including I, have always been curious about whether alternate realities, timelines parallel to our own, exist. Some would pay for information on what goes on in other timelines. Some would pay to be able to travel to them, to explore them. Of course, theoretically, we're always creating new timelines every time we act on a decision. But that's not cool enough, is it? One day, I gave in to the desire for some proof of a timeline beyond our own. I did as much research as I could. I found multiple stories about people who had supposedly traveled to alternate realities. I messaged each one of them to ask if they had any proof of their experiences. One of them got back to me. I was expecting a simple, short no. What I got was something else. I got an actual lead. I'm sick of this. Just take it. Take it and leave me alone. I know it's just a website, but that's all I can provide. I really do not understand how jumping to different timelines works, so don't bother me. You don't have to use Tor or any VPN. They aren't as secure as you might think. The dark web is filled with FBI agents already. There was a man who was part of a government operation to observe somebody who had lurked at classified information on the dark web. He was a pawn who thought he knew everything, not a government agent, in case you wanted to know. Fair enough, I thought. I didn't want to get caught up in that kind of thing. There's a box buried under the ground at north 45.2327 by west 85.3034. I won't give the full coordinates just in case. I buried it so I could forget about the damn thing. I put it in a box and refrained from destroying it in case I ever needed it. I looked up the coordinates and found the general area. There's a laptop inside the box. The password is... Don't worry, it's not my own laptop. It's no one's own personal laptop. Just put the password in. You'll then have access to an app that'll give you 10 alternate timelines to read about. You can refresh the page as many times as you'd like. And each refresh gives you 10 different alternate realities. Some of them are descriptions of wider universes. Others are descriptions of general thematic clusters of realities. You'll get a bunch of specific timelines too, of course. I drove up to the spot the coordinates pointed to. It was a forested area. I parked on the side of the road, and then I walked into the patch of trees.
And once I got to the approximate location, I began to dig. I dug for around 15 minutes until I found something. A gray box. I opened it and saw a laptop inside. And I opened it and booted it up, and then typed the password in. Then I hit enter. I was brought to a blank startup screen with one icon on the bottom left. I clicked the icon, and a page opened. I was hoping I trusted the right source. I mean, he posted a list of 5 events with exact dates back in 2013, and each event ended up happening on the corresponding dates. 2015 dates, to be specific. He deleted the post right before the exact date came, but I had written the events down on a sheet of paper right after I had first read them. I did it in case they would be deleted. It was amazing how accurate they were. Anyway, these are the 10 realities that were described on the page that came up. I typed summaries of the descriptions in my notes and remembered the images that were below each description. March 29th, 2036. March 29th, 2036 is an alternate reality where everybody grows the ability to sense the time of their death. Calendars are used as a reference for how long one has left to live. 70% of the world has March 29th, 2036 as the date of their death. 10% have it scattered over the rest of the 2030s. The youngest people won't know the exact date of their death until 6 years after the date. Now, the weirdest thing is that nobody has any major clue about what will happen on that day. There aren't any asteroids on track to even pass Earth on that day. The image below the description was an average image of Earth from space. The hyper-psychokinetic. Don't piss this guy off. He's a man who can send people into an everlasting dark gray void with no floor for any amount of time, which includes 100 years for them, but 1 second for him. He can transfer all his thoughts and feelings into someone else's head. He can make anybody he sees say or do anything within their ability. He can make people feel any pain they inflict onto others to different extents. From a small fraction to 10 times more intense. It's theorized he is using his abilities to make sure he doesn't get any media attention whatsoever. Unfortunately, it's easy to anger him as he feels entitled to almost everything. The image below was of the human brain. The shapeshift murderer. In one reality, there have been 107 cases of murder connected to an unknown shape-shifting entity. The entity disguises itself as an appliance, such as a thermostat or a blender or an item of furniture like a bed or a couch. Based on camera footage from 26 of the crime scenes, the entity observes the person for some moments before finding its way inside them. It then kills them from the inside out. All victims have a perfect circular hole in their stomach. The image below was a screenshot of security camera footage of a kitchen. A red circle was drawn over the microwave. This one really gave me chills as I read it. The Great Merge. The Great Merge was an event where 2 different timelines merged with each other. One of the timelines was like ours, only alternate in the sense it was subject to the merge. The other timeline was a reality where the current year was 1731 CE. It was also just like our timeline, but it was about 300 years behind. On January 17th, 2020, both timelines merged with each other. Everyone from the 1731 universe found themselves in a reality where it was the year 2020. A reality about
300 years ahead of theirs. Those native to the 2020 universe were split on what to do, and many saw those from the alternate past as useless glitches. Many others offered the people all the support they could give. The image below was of a horse fused with the front of a parked car outside a shop. It was a weird thing to look at. True Mirror Universe. This cluster of realities is referred to as the true mirror universe to our own. It's one where everything we know is right is what is considered wrong. Everything we know is wrong is what is considered right. Mouths are 2 times wider, spaces are minimal, what we consider pain is considered pleasure, and vice versa. Everyone talks in an offbeat, pause-heavy way. All music is offbeat, and history is not kept track of very often. The image below was of a person whose mouth extended to their nose, the bottom of their chin, and stretched to the sides of their head. The detail made it look more realistic than your average edited YouTube video thumbnail. I shivered at how unnatural it looked. The Y2K bug happened. In that reality, the Y2K computer bug became an issue. It began when electronic glitches happened in New Zealand after the clock struck midnight there. One of the things that happened was interest rates skyrocketed as databases thought many people were 100 years older than they were. This sent governments around the world into a frenzy as they anticipated the clock hitting midnight in their respective time zones. Americans had 18 hours to prepare before their clocks began to hit midnight. The image below was an image of the Times Square ball sitting on an illuminated year 2000 sign. Everyone is out to get you. Sometimes it's because you were a mass murderer there. Sometimes a strange sound from an unnatural source made everyone who heard it want to kill you. Sometimes a creature is against you and it decides to use brainwave manipulation to turn everyone against you. There are many realities in which everybody hates you with a vengeance. In some of them, you are hated for a good reason. In others, you are the unlucky subject of a demon or a cosmic force. The image below was a photo taken from an upper floor window. A dozen people stood in the front lawn. Some held hammers, others held baseball bats, others held kitchen knives. One was holding a shotgun and one was holding a rope. Mirror Portal Universe. This is a universe where people are able to jump to different realities with the use of any mirror at any time. This means that people may accidentally slip into a number of different realities, including ones where they or their friends weren't born. There's never been any guarantee they'd make it back to their home reality. The most intense realities included ones in which their sleep paralysis demon was real and was waiting to attack them, or where flames were engulfing their house at the moment. The image below was a simple image of a bathroom mirror. The verbal demon. Every time you verbalize something out loud without meaning to, it's because your subconscious detects an invisible entity that is standing near you. You have to be careful what you say, as certain trigger phrases will inspire the entity to possess you. The exact phrases aren't known. The demon never tells anybody what they are. Victims are unable to tell anybody what the phrases are, as the demon disallows them from acting on the slightest impulse. There was no image below the description. The Marianas Titan. On July 6th, 2018, an anomaly was detected in the depths of the Marianas Trench. On July 31st, 2018, a metal monstrosity with blue eyes was announced to have risen above the surface. It wasn't clear what it wanted. Scientists and militaries tried to figure it out, but came up short. There was some silence until September 1st, 2018, when it was announced New Zealand had become inaccessible due to an ominous fog-like cloud. Crews went to investigate the fog, and once they went in, all contact was lost with them. They never ended up re-emerging. On September 3rd, 2018, the fog cut Australia off from the rest of the world. On September 6th, Papua New Guinea suffered the same fate. Every 3 days, the fog consumed one big nation or two smaller nations and any nearby tiny island nations. 95% of the world was engulfed by the fog as of July 21st, 2020. No updates have come about since then. The image below was taken in a field. A thick white cloud of fog took up the entirety of the area in the distance, reaching up to the clouds. Some of these were clearly realities alternate to our own. We as a species are unable to know when we're going to die. Y2K wasn't a big issue. No one from 1731 is alive anymore. And I would know if I accidentally slipped into another reality after staring into a mirror. And there's no fog. I assumed the same about the others until I read the disclaimer at the bottom of the page. Information provided from timeline 07/02/2022, 1901 56787 to the timeline you're reading this in. All information is provided from a timeline you don't belong to. To prevent an overload of attempts to cross into other timelines, one of the 10 timelines is your own. My heart sank as I realized that any one of them could be our reality. At any point, I could be subjected to a psychokinetic horror story. I could be murdered by a shape-shifting entity. Everyone might want to cut me up all of a sudden. But which one? I wondered. When will I find out which one of those realities is my own? Hopefully, not when it's too late. However, there's nothing I can do if any of that stuff happens to me. It sounds impossible to stop. I cannot prepare for any of it without expecting hell no matter what. I feel cold again typing this out. It's been 4 days since I read the information, and I've been pondering about which everyday person might be the one with hyper-psychokinesis. Which phrase must I not say out loud? Can I find a way to make sure somebody likes me enough to at least leave me alone if in the future some weird thing makes everybody want to murder me? I'm exhausted right now. If there's something I'm missing, I'll think about it tomorrow. Anyway, I gotta go check on my thermostat. Out of the corner of my eye, I've been noticing that the numbers keep changing for a couple seconds every minute or so. You can't call me at work, I said. This is highly unprofessional.
I'm sorry, he said, but I got something special. Never seen anything like it.
Angel wasn't much for hyperbole. He'd done this for years. If he said he'd never seen anything like it, and he's calling me at work about it, it must be special.
I'm listening. I got a new source. They have something amazing.
Green?
Of course. That's what you pay me for. I wouldn't risk it. I nodded.
I'd never had a problem working with Angel before, and he was usually great at proofing his sources.
I'm a collector, not a monster. What do you have? Honestly, I don't have the slightest idea. But I'll bet my ponytail you'll love it.
That
if anything, was interesting. Not the ponytail, but the offer. I've always had an interest in the macabre, and I feel an amazing sense of control when people talk to me or visit my house, not knowing what I keep in the dark collection room. It makes me feel like I'm stronger and smarter, like a fox among chickens, confidently strutting among them. It brings me the confidence I need to do my job, and it earns me the money to support my lavish lifestyle. I've been collecting for years. It started with leftovers and vestigial parts, milk teeth and nostrils, just these useless little things that were thrown away. A discarded umbilical cord was my first step up, and when I got my first parasitic twin, I was ecstatic. It was all supposed to be discarded and thrown away, but to me, it turned into a wonderful collection. And over the past 15 years, I've expanded into 2 rooms. Shelf after shelf of discarded organs and enough bones to construct a complete human skeleton from dozens of people. I have 6 different human hearts, 3 brains, 8 pairs of eyes, organs who couldn't or wouldn't be donated. Some from the young, some from the old, some healthy, some sick, some disfigured. I prefer the latter. They make for more interesting pieces. But they do have to be green. No grave robbing, no illegal harvesting, nothing unethical. Either willing or dead, and nothing marked for donation. If someone needs that heart, I don't want it. But a pair of eyes with heterochromia from someone who peacefully passed, I have a place for those. I'd honor those. Maybe get a little rotating platform. I didn't just want to have volumes of organs, though. No, I wanted variety and, most of all, rarity. I worked with a few doctors and morticians over the years, but most were squeamish and uncomfortable. I could barely get anything, not to mention anything fresh. But a few years ago, I started talking to Angel. Now, Angel works exclusively online, and I know he has a vast contact network, but he works mostly in North America. Mostly the East Coast, but sometimes in the Midwest. And I know he has certain illegal dealings, especially in the high-end wine trade, but he's always played it straight with me. He has the proper documentation and can prove to me not only that the organ is what it is, but that the patient is either dead, unharmed, or consenting. Green. As I say it out loud, it sounds so brutal. That's not what this is about. This is about control, and that delicious warmth in my chest. It feels like being Clark Kent, knowing that all that stands between you and the complete ruin of everyone around you is social convention, mercy, and a pair of glasses. I got the big S right here. My trophies. That day when Angel called me, I had no idea what to expect. So when I got an email with 20 attached images, my heart was racing. I grabbed a glass of dry white, dimmed the lights, and spun my chair around. It was an unknown patient, dead of blunt force trauma, possibly some kind of traffic accident. No one had claimed the body. No one seemed to know who they were. But this person, this anonymous nobody, had some really strange features. During the autopsy, Angel's contact reached out to see if we were interested in some lovingly named leftovers. And the pictures they showed me, well, it gave me shivers. I had no idea what I was looking at. Wonderful. It looked like a human organ, but it was either smoke damaged or almost fermented. Less than 6 hours out of the body and almost completely black. It looked like it was wrapped in some sort of seaweed with little barbs holding it all together. I had no idea what I was looking at, and I was already salivating over it. This was going to be preserved and given a proper placing for sure.
They say this is a human heart, the email read. A piggyback heart. A growth added on top of the regular heart to help combat heart disease. But I've never seen anything like it. Those are usually added surgically. This is organic. It has no name, and my contact wants to study it, but they're willing to send it off once they've done preliminary scans. Not gonna lie, this'll cost you. It's not damaged. Eucalyptus fresh. Green as grass. I had to have it. This was a unique find, as close to mint as I could get. I wanted to know all about it, and I wanted to have this trophy. It deserved my admiration, and I didn't even try to play it cool. I knew Angel wouldn't try to rip me off. I just asked him to name his price. Angel got back to me the next day. He hired a courier and assured me the package would be delivered within 36 hours. He sent me more pictures, along with a few links to the accident. Some guy in a raincoat hit by a truck. Didn't look like much. Angel didn't want to say too much as to not reveal his sources, but it looked legitimate. For an entire day, I was like a kid waiting to open a Christmas present. A genuine, unique type of organ in my collection. I had a few rarities, but this was different. This could be something new. This would elevate me one step over the other collectors. Of course, there are others. I mean, what's the point of a collection if you can't brag about it? When I got home, there was this nervous 20-something outside my door, tapping her foot. She just handed over a cooler and ran. No confirmation if I was the right person, no code word, no notification, nothing. Angel usually has more professional people. I mean, getting a delivery from sketchy people makes you look sketchy in turn, you know? But I brought it up and opened it up. And I prepared myself and cut the foam open. Still ice cold with vacuum packaging, marked with Hatchet Pharma, like most of Angel's deliveries. Can't miss it with that icy blue plastic wrapper. It is a pain to open, though. I put on my gloves and started preparing a preservative jar. I had a few jars that would work while I got something fancier for the showroom. And even though I'd done this literally hundreds of times, I was visibly nervous. My hands were shaking. When I cut the bag open and reached in to grab the organ, I immediately felt a sting on the tip of my finger. The barbs were sharp. Bringing it out into the light, I finally got a better view of it. This thing was bigger than my fist, and this was not just a piggyback heart. This was an entire organ in and of itself. It was a dark hazelnut brown with black veins, some sort of dark green skin flaps covering up the edges. Parts of it had these sharp barbs, some sort of keratin. I'd never seen anything like it. And I could tell that it had a structure similar to a human heart, though. And it had clear connections to the pulmonary artery. But with just a quick look, it looked more like a dragon fruit. It was glorious. I couldn't wait to find out more about it. I gently placed it in the preservative, trying not to prick my fingers again. Oh, I was very pleased. My finger did hurt a little, though. I spent hours in my lounge chair just looking at the thing in the dim light of my collection. A mild teal spotlight, casting a sharp contrast. I mean, even with a temporary preservative jar, I had it on a rotating platform so I could see it from every angle. And I still couldn't tell what was the right orientation. I mean, what was the front and back? It was impossible to tell. It barely looked like, well, anything. I fell asleep in that chair, waking up just past midnight. I shut the lights off
and got ready for bed. And I didn't even think about the ache in my fingertip where the barb had punctured my skin. I fell in and out of sleep all night. I had a fever, and by morning I didn't know what was real and what wasn't. I'd gotten up to use the bathroom a dozen times, and I was sweating buckets. The sheets were sticking to my body, and I was drooling like an idiot. My feet were wet from sweat, leaving stains across the floor. I barely had the energy to stand, and my balance kept failing on me. The only point where I felt truly alive was when I was getting up from the toilet and fell over. My warm cheek against the cold bathroom tiles was the greatest thing I'd felt in years. I managed to crawl into the kitchen. I called in sick for the first time in years and fell asleep leaning against the kitchen island. I kept blinking in and out of consciousness. Honestly, I probably sat there for a few hours. I woke up with this big, chemical-smelling puddle under me, and my robe was covered in mucus. I tried to call for help, but I was too weak to hold the phone. I just remember smearing gross across the screen, and the face recognition just refused to work. I couldn't get a fingerprint either. I sat there all morning, just trying to muster the strength to move. I had bouts of panic thinking I might not ever recover, that this would be it. I would feel my pulse hammering, and I could physically feel my heart moving. Despite my body giving up, my heart was as strong as ever. A bit too strong, it felt like. It hurt like hell. I managed to get some water from the tap, but I couldn't keep it down. I kept slipping and falling over, bruising my knees and elbows. It was a goddamn miracle that I didn't crack my head open. I woke up in the kitchen floor sometime in the afternoon. The sky was gray outside, and I could hear rain smatter against the windows. I managed to sit back up and grab some orange juice from the fridge. Just getting back up on my legs was exhausting, and I found myself wheezing for air. Sitting there, chugging a jug of orange juice, all I thought about was getting through this. My head was starting to clear, but my chest still felt weird. I hadn't even noticed my finger. My entire fingertip was just one big boil that had burst sometime during the day. I managed to stumble into the shower and dump all clothes into a pile. I was covered in cuts, bruises, and these big, discolored circles on my legs. I looked as good as I felt, but at least I was back on my legs. Shaky legs, but still. There were still smatterings against my window, but it sounded more intense. I didn't think about it at first. I was just concentrating on staying upright. I'd clean the mess in the kitchen once I felt better. This was probably just some temporary thing that needed to get out of my system. Food sickness or some kind of bug. I didn't even think about my latest collection piece. I keep those two lives very separate. By the time I stepped out of the shower and into a fresh robe, I kept having these flashes. It was as if the lights were turning on and off. It took me a few seconds to realize it was coming from the window. Looking out, my breath stopped. Something was moving past the window, casting a long shadow across the floor. And then something else moved. Again and again, big shadows whooshed past the window, their large shadows making this entire room blink. I took a step closer, blinking. For a while, I couldn't see them. It was as if they were there, and at the same time, they weren't. But when they were there in horrifying detail. They were the size of large dogs, these pale, winged, six-fingered beasts. round, beady eyes reflecting what little light slipped between the clouds. Like insects flocking to a lamp, they swarmed around my windows, fighting to get a look at me. Carefully, they tried to pull at the window frames, probing for a weakness, a way in. I just stood there, looking at them. It felt like my heart was about to cramp. One of them clung to the window, staring at me, unblinking. I couldn't comprehend it. I just closed my eyes and started hitting my head over and over, like trying to beat the image out of my skull. I groaned in frustration and felt my pulse rise. When I finally opened my eyes again, they were gone. I slowly backed away from the window, as if trying not to knock over a house of cards, as my heart snagged on something. A barbed pain shot through my lungs, and at the edge of every heartbeat, they came back into view, blinking in and out of existence. One moment, all I heard was the rain. The next, they were clawing themselves in. Oh, they were there, and at the same time, they weren't. I needed help, but my phone had run out of battery. I splashed my face with cold water and stepped away to check on my collection. I had to get a closer look at this mystery organ. There was a kinship there, one sick heart to another. It was oozing out of the jar. The preservatives had turned a solid blue, and the organ had swelled. It had doubled in size, and the little barbs had turned long and soft, like tendrils. But the strangest thing was what it had done to the rest of my collection. The other jars were also swelling, some preservatives turning blue, cracking the glass, and dripping onto the floor. As my pulse rose and fell, seemingly at random, I could see flashes of the organ moving. 1 second it was trying to break out of the jar, the next it was just sitting there, much like the creatures outside. It was both happening and not at the same time. My head was flashing hot and cold, and I could feel my legs buckling. Maybe it was all just the fever. Maybe nothing was wrong. Maybe I was still on the cool bathroom floor. The warmth and cold that pulsed in my head made it hard to stay upright. The floor felt crooked, but I think it might have just been me. I hurried back into my living room. For a moment, it was all quiet. Then, a torrent of sounds, faces, scratching claws, and leathery wings slamming against the windows. And then, a heartbeat later, all quiet. Over and over again, it was as if another world tried to beat itself into my mind. Two realities trying to fit into my head at once. Slamming, scratching, screeching. It could go either way. It felt like a part of me was balancing on the edge of a knife, ready to fall one direction or the other. Screech, scratch, slamming against the windows with hopeless abandon. But there was another noise. A voice.
Hello.
I stepped into the hallway. I could see the shadows from the window behind me come and go with my irregular heartbeats. But there was a strange metallic noise coming from the front door. I turned the corner. There was something standing in my hallway. And a moment later, it wasn't. My door was open and also broken, hanging loose from the bottom hinge. A dark, towering creature. It was there and not. Large enough that it had to tilt its head to stand upright. With his impossibly long arms and fingers, he held a simple paper bag, dripping with blood. Then, he was gone. My breathing slowed. I just stood there, trying to calm down. Everything was fine. Door closed, gentle rain tapping at my windows. Then, the paper bag was held up against my face. The creature was looming over me. The winged beasts outside were going crazy.
Give him what he wants.
A muffled voice from inside the bag pleaded.
He just wants it back. Please, just give it to him.
I fell backwards, crawling desperately. My sweaty hands slipped on the hardwood floor, scratching my palms and losing traction. It took the creature no more than 2 steps to catch up to me, holding the bag out towards me.
It's not yours to keep. You got your own.
There was no doubt in my mind. Forcing myself to stand, I crashed into my collection room, knocking over jars and trophy cases, little boxes of teeth, little strands of mummified fetuses. The jar with this strange organ had cracked, leaking a blue, thick fluid onto the floor. It was a mess. It was all just a big, disgusting chemical mess. I grabbed the organ, feeling the soft barbs, little tendrils tickling my arm. I stepped back to the large creature and held out the organ. It turned its bag inside out as something soft splattered onto the floor. Something meaty and human with a ponytail. A decapitated head trying to breathe, opening and closing its mouth like a trout. I dropped the organ in the bag. The next moment, I was alone. A broken collection. Formalin and alcohol running rampant over the floor. My feet barely avoiding the broken glass. Just outside, the rain gently tapped against my window. I haven't experienced anything like it since. The floor wasn't crooked, and the door was fine. No scratches on the windows, no bloodstains, no nothing. And still, the organ is gone. And I haven't been able to get back into contact with Angel. It's like a line was cut, and I haven't heard from him since. Something must have happened, and I have my suspicions, but I don't think I can handle that path just yet. It still feels like I'm one bad thought away from stepping back into that dark world. Like the winged creatures are still looking for a way in. I was sick for a few days afterwards, and I looked awful. I've since contacted a medical professional, and they have found some irregularities with my pulse, and I'm waiting for x-ray results. I don't want to sound too alarmed, but the doctor brought in 3 other people to consult with. I know, this story doesn't make me sound all too sympathetic. I'm no saint, and to a lot of people, I guess I come off as a bit of a creep. But if you can just put that aside for a bit and think of me as a human, then please, pray that the results are normal.
You know, I actually lived in Salem for a little while, back in, I don't know, like the late 1600s or so. It's been a while now, but yeah, I was an influencer, before influencers were even a thing. Yeah, I kind of started my own movement. A couple people died. It was really wild, you know?
It followed me out of the woods.
I keep it trapped in my crawl space. It looked like Bill. It talked like Bill. It's not Bill. The sinking feeling of being watched came over me on a routine hike, but I ignored it. It happens sometimes. It's best to keep a steady pace. When the feeling of being watched curdled into the feeling of being followed, I calmly turned back. A feeling is just a feeling until it cries out loud. Hey! A wail emanated from the surrounding trees. My heart jumped, but I ignored the urge to sprint. When I cleared the tree line, the wail turned into a painful moan. I turned around. Beyond the ash branches, I could just make out a figure shambling down the trail. "Are you okay?" I yelled out. "Yeah." It patted its chest. "Bill." It limped into the clearing and fell on all fours. It let out another painful moan as its body contorted into a disjointed crawl. I squared off reflexively and shuffled backwards. When it broke into a gallop, I bolted for my truck. The sound of hooves closed in behind me. I felt its breath on my neck just before it knocked me off my feet, and I groped at the ground as its fingers closed around my throat. My fingers closed around a rock, and I swung for my life. The full weight of its body slumped down on me, and I heaved it to the side. By all marks, Bill looked human. It wore a flannel shirt and jeans. It brandished a full beard. Worse yet, it was a Bill I recognized. Its eyes snapped open, and it lunged again, but I brought the rock down harder this time. I heard his skull crack like wet celery. It looked like Bill. It talked like Bill. Hell, it bled like Bill. I grabbed some rope from the bed of the pickup. It didn't like being hogtied. It bit and scratched the whole time. It all happened so fast, I don't even remember how I got it in the truck. And when I drug it into the house, I knew it wasn't a good idea, but nothing seemed like a good idea. I stuffed it down the crawlspace hatch and tied it to a floor post until I could figure out what to do with it. That was over a year ago. It wailed and moaned for days, and then the screams turned to sobs, and finally, silence. After about a week, it started talking. Its voice sounded grainy, like an old tube television tuned to static or an answering machine. Right before it started talking, you could hear an audible click and another click when it finished.
"Friends looking for Bill."
Bill vanished summer 2017. The TV spots still run, but everyone's given up the ghost.
"Janice still waits for Bill."
Its tactics, its patterns of speech improved with every new attempt.
"Please, we're so stiff, just one limb."
Its voice came across as an elderly man, off-putting but hideously persuasive. I climbed down through the trap and actually started loosening the rope around its feet. If I hadn't noticed the drool running down its chin, it would have had me for sure. It looked like Bill. It sounded like Bill. It's not Bill. My brain feels hijacked. I wish I could have ignored it, but its voice drew me in. I sealed the crawlspace hatch just to keep myself in check.
"I want you."
I'd grown accustomed to its clicking.
I need you.
It's been weeks since the last I heard it.
I love you.
Last night, I bolted upright from a dead sleep. A click, followed by another click a moment later. And then a click came every few seconds. They sounded muffled. I traced it to a corner of the living room. I grabbed a torch and a broom and unfastened the hatch. The clicks came faster and faster. I climbed down and pointed the torch at the post where I kept Bill tied. The rope sagged around his empty clothes and shoes. I shined the flashlight toward the source of the clicking. In the corner was a man-sized web sack. The webbing covered almost its whole body. It covered everything except for its shoes. My shoes. The shoes I wore when I came down the step ladder. It was wearing a pair of my identical shoes. As it started to sink in, the clicking stopped. The web sack stirred. Something undulated from within the cocoon. I stood frozen in place. I heard a tearing sound as a hand burst through the shell. It was wearing my nail polish. I scrambled through the hatch in a dead heat and dropped the door hard behind me. It pounded and begged as I secured the screws. And I sighed with bittersweet relief as the screaming turned to sobs.
Please, you don't have to do this. Please don't do to me what you did to Bill.
It's soul-wrenching. No one should hear the sound of their own voice begging for mercy. We aren't the only store left in the mall. There's about 6 small stores total, but they're all spread out along the different spokes of this wagon wheel-shaped mall. We're the only ones in this section, and sometimes the other stores close early. And considering the lack of foot traffic, I don't really blame them. But with all the other storefronts dark and much of the mall lighting itself dead, light can be very limited at night. And I'd never closed before, but at least Britt was going to be there with me. She was kind, peppy, and super helpful. The only thing is, Britt never came. She no-call, no-showed, which she had never done before. I was worried and called our manager, Chris, and his exact response was, "No one wants to work these days. You can close alone. It's fine." He came by and dropped off the extra gate key, muttering about work ethic. I bit my tongue at that. I know Britt, and that she and her family are short on money. I mean, she worked her ass off, and she'd never just skip work without a good reason. Even then, I was confident she'd let us know. But that is how I ended up where I am now. My knees pulled to my chest, phone on silent, my screen brightness turned down, waiting for the sun to come up. Not alone. And I wish I were. I'm banking on whatever is out there being averse to sunlight because it's so pale, almost translucent. So, how did I end up here, you ask? We hadn't had a customer in 2 hours, and the mall had descended into a level of darkness that surprised me. No wonder we got very little business after dark. I mean, from the road, I bet the whole mall looks like it's shut down. I wish we had some sort of music playing to break the utter silence, but the sound system, like most things in this place, was broken. I occupied myself by dusting and prepping everything for the next morning. It was both a good way to prepare for the approaching end of my shift and to distract myself while making a bit of noise in the process, to cut through the thick silence. Eventually, I stepped out of the store and closed the gate so I could make a quick bathroom break. I'd written up a "Be Right Back" sign with a smiley face to stick on the gate, but I doubted it would be seen by any eyes other than my own. The green exit sign flickered at me before it too surrendered to the darkness. And the only sounds I could hear were the buzzing of the struggling sign and my own footsteps echoing. I jumped as I saw a pale figure behind the glass of one of the closed stores out of the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, but it looked to just be the scant neon light coming from the distant and empty food court, illuminating an old mannequin. No thanks, I thought to myself as I speed walked towards the bathroom. And why do mall bathrooms always have to be at the end of such long hallways? I suddenly wished I'd brought my phone with me, even just to have the screen illumination. The inside of the bathroom was nice and bright, but as soon as I had entered the stall, a hoarse whisper from outside of the stall nearly made me jump.
Please, I'm scared.
What? I whispered back nervously. Silence. And when I went to wash my hands, I noticed that all the stalls were open and it was quiet. I never heard anyone enter or leave. And I thought I heard a choked sob from behind me, but chalked it up to my overactive imagination. And the downside of the well-illuminated bathroom was that it made the hallway feel even more eerie once I entered back into the darkness. Once I was leaving and nearly at the end of the hallway, I heard the other door to the other bathroom, I assumed the one across the hall since there hadn't been anyone in the other bathroom with me, open and close from behind me. I reminded myself that the mall wasn't actually abandoned, so a customer emerging from the restroom was not a supernatural event. But what was concerning was how they filled the hallway with a pungent stench, like a dumpster full of old food that had been sitting out in the hot sun for days. I tried not to gag, or to betray my fear by looking over my shoulder, and I thought I heard a wheezy rattling noise like someone struggling to breathe. I quickened my pace. On my way back, I instinctively glanced back at the storefront with the mannequin that had scared the crap out of me earlier. The store was empty now. Nope. I sprinted back to my store. I could hear the wheezing and a sort of dragging shuffle behind me in the distance. I struggled with the gate because my hands were shaking, but I finally got it to open, and I opened it just enough for me to slide under, and I decided to close it behind me. If a customer did happen to come, I'd just unlock it and let them in. I felt infinitely better after I had locked the gate behind me. I drummed my fingers nervously on the counter when I noticed my fingers and palms were dirty. It looked like blood and was patterned as if it had come from the gate. It was thicker, darker though. It didn't look fresh. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't blood, and even if it were, there was a perfectly logical explanation. I went to the back to look for paper towels because I was not going back to the bathroom. I'd been working in the back for a bit and had regained my composure for the most part when I heard what sounded like someone shaking the gate. Whoops. It sounded like we did have a customer after all. There was no one there by the time I made it to the gate, and if they called and complained to Chris, I'd never hear the end of it. And, I did feel guilty too. I always strived to provide great customer service. I was just so unnerved that I was off my game. I approached the gate. "Hey, I'm sorry, we're open," I whispered to the darkness. Silence was the response, although I thought I heard the faint rattling wheezing again. I craned my neck and angled my body so I could look further down the corridor, and I could make out a tall, pale figure in the distance. So someone from one of the other stores was pranking me by moving mannequins around. Great. But as I stared, the distant purple neon light from the food court illuminated it enough for me to see that its arms and legs were too long. Its torso was too short to resemble any mannequin I had ever seen. The pale arms ended in long-fingered hands stained a dark color. The exit sign it was standing under chose that moment to feebly attempt to flicker back to life. Flash, flash, flash. In each flicker of the weak green light, I got a brief look at its face. It was looking off to the side. I didn't see any eyes, but I could see what looked like slits for a nose and a long, wide mouth. I jumped back and gasped, and in my haste, I accidentally rattled the gate. Loudly. Its head instantly jerked in my direction. Shit. Flash, flash, flash. It was coming closer. I ran and did my best to jump and clear the counter, but instead hung my foot and crashed into the display behind it. I didn't try and fix it. I just sat in a sort of upright fetal position. My khakis were torn, and a small line of blood seeped from my knee. I'd scraped my chin and elbow on something, but I was otherwise physically okay. And Chris is never going to let me hear the end of it for knocking the display over. It's still outside the gate. I can't see it, so I hope it can't see me, but every so often I hear it wheezing, a low guttural coming from directly outside. Right now, I hear it rattling the gate, mixed in with sounds as if it's scraping long, thin fingers down the bars. I wonder if maybe Britt didn't no-call, no-show after all. Maybe she never left the mall after she locked up last night. I'm not going home tonight. I'm waiting until the sun comes up. Oh, and I'm never closing again.
Hey, just checking you. You seemed like you were having a little bit of a bad dream there, so I just wanted to make sure that everything's okay. Alright, good. If you need me, I'll be sitting right over here, okay?
Excerpt from the Journal of Aiden Jansen, Jr., June 14th, 2021. When I was a boy, I never once thought I'd reach the point where I am now, and yet here I stand. I'm of course eternally grateful for the many wonderful things that have happened to me. The growing success of Acumen is not something that I think I've taken for granted. But I won't act as if I didn't earn it. Not many people can take a small tech company and bring it into the Fortune 500 in under 10 years, but I've done just that. I turned Acumen into my company, and in the next 5 years, I have no doubt that it will become a household name. But 5 years is a long time to wait. And I find that as I draw closer to 40, the years go by faster and faster. Time is not a construct I consider to be on my side, and fate is difficult to predict. Anything can happen in 5 years. Anything. And were I just an ordinary man, I would simply resign myself to being just another prisoner of time. But I am not ordinary. Not anymore. No, today I've taken my first step towards my apotheosis. I've had a friend in the world of rare books for a while now. It's really just been a bit of a side hobby, but I've learned some interesting things from some of the old tomes I've found. Things most people wouldn't be able to handle, mentally speaking. But I've got a much stronger mind than most. My friend mentioned something very interesting, listed at a low-key auction in Hong Kong, of all places. An intact and untranslated copy of a text known as Grimoire Roshi Fairy, the Grove of Fae's Grimoire. I've only ever heard of it referred to in other texts. Supposedly, it is one of the most comprehensive grimoires you can find. If you believe the stories surrounding it, it was not authored by anyone who existed in this universe as we know it. Instead, it was apparently recovered from the personal library of the ancient god Shal, several thousand years ago. Now, I don't know if any of that is true, but it certainly makes this particular grimoire sound especially tantalizing, don't you think? Now, you can technically find an incomplete version of the text, about 20 to 30 pages, if you look hard enough, but none of it is particularly enlightening. You can find more useful spells and rituals in lesser grimoires. But an intact and untranslated copy? Well, how could I resist? I departed for Hong Kong immediately, of course, and even before I left, I'd pull some strings and grease some palms to get the grimoire pulled out of the auction. With something this rare, one doesn't risk it getting snatched up by someone else in some backroom auction. No, an intact edition of the Grove Fae's Grimoire is not something I'd be willing to gamble on. I made a generous enough donation to the previous owner that they were happy to part with it, and truthfully, I don't think they or the auctioneers will miss it much. I mean, to them, it's just an old book, a curiosity. I don't think they're capable of understanding its true value. Otherwise, they'd have never listed it on the auction in the first place. I have the tome with me now as I fly home. It's a weathered old thing and must be kept in a protective jacket to prevent damage. And I haven't dared to touch it yet, even though I so desperately want to. Better not risk damaging it. Not until it's in the proper environment where I can study it. And I've already contacted someone who can assist me with the translation. Someone who I know can be discreet. If word gets out that I've gotten this, I could attract the wrong kind of attention. Now, what I've got with me is more valuable than money could hope to buy. And if the stories about this tome are true, then what I have with me is the key to surpassing the limits of a mortal man. It is the first steps on the path to godhood. I truly can't wait. Excerpt from the Journal of Alden Jansen, July 28th, 2021. Translating the grimoire has proven a time-consuming task. I've hired on Professor Mortimer Galanti, a man I've worked with before. And Galanti doesn't ask too many questions, and he doesn't buy into the occult. And he's convinced that this is a religious text. His preference would be that I share this with the world, but if I pay him enough, he keeps his mouth shut about that. The grimoire is in Old East Slavic, and Galanti suspects it originated from what is now Belarus during the 15th century. It's almost certainly not the original text, but that doesn't surprise me. While I've never found any recounting of what became of the original text, I assume it was either destroyed or reclaimed by the god it was stolen from. However, a near complete copy like this, though, should be enough for my purposes. Galanti's progress has been slow, and I will admit that it is my fault. He's only allowed access to the book at my home, while I am present. It's not that I don't trust him. It's that I simply cannot afford to trust anyone. His protests on the matter have been noted and ignored. He'll continue to work under the conditions that I dictate for him, and I pay him well enough that he wouldn't dare quit on me, even if he wanted to. I know plenty of ways to keep him motivated. There are things men love more than money. That said, while his progress has been slow, it hasn't yielded nothing at all. He sent me some translated pages that prove to me that this text is the real deal. I've practiced some of the simpler incantations. There's one that details an herbal tea you can brew that allows one to enter an astral state. My experiments with that proved highly successful. Other simple rituals include summoning rain or snow and a simple sacrification ritual that removes my body's need for sleep. I figured that if I seek to achieve divinity, I won't have the time for rest, and after a few days without having felt the weight of physical exhaustion on me, I must say, I feel freer than I have in my entire life. Galantis' most recent pages are of particular interest to me, however. And about a week ago, I asked him to focus on any pages that contain references to the ancient gods, and he has not disappointed me. The translated pages he sent me last night detail how to create a weapon known as the Finger of Unifying Death. Quite a mouthful, but if this truly is what the book claims it is, then I think it's worthy of the grandiose name. According to the text, the Finger of Unifying Death is one of the few blessed weapons one can use to truly kill a god. Not just weaken or banish one, but outright kill it. And that alone is interesting, but one passage in particular stands out to me. On the path to Apotheosis, the Finger of Unifying Death is an unrivaled tool, for it is one of the few things that can carve the heart of a god. Apotheosis, carving the heart of a god. I suspect I see where this is going. I will, of course, wait until Galanti has uncovered more, but I am already looking through the text I have available to me for any corroborating information. I have no reason to suspect that this text would lie, but it can't hurt to be too prepared, can it? Excerpt from the Journal of Alden Jansen, August 2nd, 2021. I've asked Galanti to look for other mentions of Apotheosis in the grimoire. I was hoping it would streamline my process a little, and I was correct. Last night he brought me something fascinating. A complete ritual dictating how to craft the finger of unifying death. This is the Holy Grail, perhaps the most important ritual he could have given me. This is the key to godhood, and it is within my grasp. The text he provided states that a finger can only be crafted within a realm known as the Gloom. It is said to be home of the ancient goddess Malvu, and believed by some to be the afterlife, although I've heard conflicting accounts on the matter. To forge it, one needs to travel there. There are rituals that would permit one access to the Gloom, although they typically come with warnings advising against traveling there, as it is not a place where the living are meant to dwell. Needless to say, I didn't come this far just to be deterred by simple warnings meant to keep out the meek. The Grimoire of Primrose Kennard details a fairly reliable ritual to physically enter the Gloom by burning the bones of a fresh corpse. Now, I'll admit, I had a bit of trouble obtaining a fresh cadaver, and it took no small amount of time to have the body discreetly prepared for the ritual. But I have the money required to make things happen discreetly. A downtown crematorium was willing to part with the remains of one of their customers, and I know a man who has some friends in low places, one of which was willing to do the butchery for me, no questions asked. By early evening, I had the bones I required, and I laid them out as the ritual specified. I burned the bones in a makeshift pyre filled with cypress incense. I had set the fire to produce as much smoke as possible, and when I had breathed enough in, I found my way through the flames and into a place beyond. Many texts are out there that describe the Gloom, but I feel like very few of them do it justice. It is not a beautiful place, although it has beauty to it, with a glum, dusky pink sky. Scarce trees dotted the landscape with a pale pink mist floating between them, making it hard to see too far into the distance. If this was the land of the dead, I'm not so sure I would have wanted to spend my afterlife there. But I suppose I only ever saw the part of it most mortals are permitted to see, and I wasn't inclined to trespass longer than I needed to. The goddess Malvu was almost certainly already watching my every move. The mist was what I had come for, so I did not waste any time in setting to work. The ritual I had uncovered described a manner to forge a blade from it. The process takes some time. First, one must freeze just enough of the mist to form a base, and from there, one must freeze bits more onto it to form a dagger. It's not a ritual for anyone who is not well versed in the arcane arts, but I've been studying for almost 15 years now, mastering my craft in the hopes that it might take me far. And so, my effort paid off. Inch by inch, I forged my blade, my finger of unifying death. And when the blade was formed, I carved runes into the ice to make sure it stayed intact. And when the work was done, I left the gloom behind. The blade is a beautiful thing. Crystalline and pinkish, but I can see a rainbow of other colors shining within as it catches the light. I've bound it in some leather so I can hold it safely. Touching the blade with bare skin is so indescribably cold that it almost feels like it burns. And I'd hate to see what long-term exposure would do to me. The small tests I've done with the blade so far have shown it to be remarkably resilient. It goes through everything like a hot knife through butter. This is truly a weapon of the gods. And I think it will serve me well. Excerpt from the Journal of Alden Jansen, August 4th, 2021. I invoked my first god this evening. A weak thing, subservient to another lesser god. But it was still a god. I've set up a space in my basement where I can work in peace. I've established a summoning circle there and brought down both the grimoires I have in my possession and Galante's translations from the Grove Phase grimoire. Summoning gods is no easy feat. Many of them are fickle and may choose to ignore you if they so please. The more powerful lesser gods are infamously difficult to invoke, and even if I could reliably summon them, I didn't want to test myself against them. Not yet. The creature I summoned was known in the text as the King Eater. And I suppose it only barely classified as a lesser god, and maybe better defined as a fae who had grown a little too powerful. But I was certain I could summon it easily enough. It appeared to me as a snarling, serpentine creature with a human face. The ritual I used dictated that one should offer it the heart of a sacrifice to appease it, lest it turn on you. However, I saw no need to bother with that. When the creature was summoned, I simply brandished my blade at it, and watched as it hissed in rage. I wish I could say that this so-called god put up a fight, but it did not. No. The finger of unifying death did its work spectacularly, slicing through the beast and leaving it screaming in agony as I delivered the killing blow. Against an ordinary man, it would have put up a fight, but against the power of the ancient gods, it was nothing more than a bug to be squashed. From the corpse, I took its heart. According to the Grove Phase grimoire, consuming the heart of a dead god will allow you to take on a piece of it, to absorb that which made it a god. And so that was what I did. I ate it raw, and I can feel the change within me. I have surpassed most men on this planet. I have taken my first step towards godhood. I have slain a god and consumed its heart. I've taken some time away from work. I can have no distractions. Acumen will run itself without me for a time. I need to focus on this. I am close now. I will ascend. Excerpt from the Journal of Alden Jansen, September 9th, 2021. The Grove Phase grimoire has given me so much. So many weaker gods ripe for the culling. To list them all would be a waste. No one will remember them now that they are gone, but they will remember me. I've been busy. I think I've killed 15 now, one every few days, and I have become something new. The runes I scarred into my body made sleep unnecessary for me, but those runes are gone now. My body has no more scars, no more imperfections. My vision has improved. I no longer need my glasses. Yet, despite the loss of the magic I carved into my flesh, I still don't require sleep. When I eat, I only do so for the pleasure of eating. I don't need food anymore. My mind feels clear, as if all superfluous thoughts have faded away and I can focus upon my singular purpose. And from that clarity has come genius. I know things I should not be able to know about the world, about the state of all things. Perhaps that will soon become omniscience. We'll see. The few gods who manage to lay a hand upon me don't hurt me anymore. I've long since surpassed them. Magic has become trivially easy for me now. Once, I needed to use incenses and candles to leave my body and enter a more astral state. No more. I am advancing beyond what any other man should be capable of, and I find myself eager to pursue my next target. I may no longer need food, but I still hunger. I need more. And beyond that, I need to test my limits. Excerpt from the Book of Acumen, September 21st, 2021. I have partially returned to work, although I have no intention of allowing that to become my primary focus. No, I simply need a testing ground. Galanti uncovered a few new pages a week ago about the creation of sigils for gods, and I've been experimenting with that. I'd considered trying to fast-track a new company logo, but that would take too long. So I've tried a shortcut. The Acumen logo isn't a traditional rune, but I wanted to see if it would suffice. I carved it into stone and poured my energy into it. I left a part of me in the first carving, and I felt as I spread through the cosmos. It worked. Wherever Acumen is, I am. Whoever wears the logo of Acumen now belongs to me. The possibilities here are endless. I used to think that in 5 years I could make my company even larger than it already was. Today, I think that in 5 years, I can become the new god of this world. Already I've sensed the change in my employees. They work differently now. I don't even think they're aware of it. My hands guide them in their work, and I've seen the beginnings of a new synergy. I'll mold them quietly, slowly, gently into my first priests. My workers will be my first congregation. And when my new world comes, they will work for the glory of Acumen. Acumen. The man I took this company from chose it because he liked the way it sounded, thought it was professional, and made a statement. Truthfully, I agree. I like it. I think it suits me. Excerpt from the Book of Acumen, October 16th, 2021. I received a letter today, an invitation to some New Orleans bar. No text, no indication why it was sent. Only a name. Helena Malibu. Not a name I'm familiar with. And yet, try as I might to look into her, I see nothing. I've been able to sense most others, but somehow she eludes me. Fascinating. I will go, see what this woman has to say, and then I will decide what to do about her. Excerpt from the Book of Acumen, October 19th, 2021. Hubris. I was generous. I accepted this Malibu woman's invitation and departed for New Orleans shortly after receiving her invitation. The bar she'd requested we meet at looked to be nothing special, and yet I could sense something awry with it as I drew near. An ethereal quality to it, as though it was there and not there at the same time. Still, I entered. A woman with dark hair was waiting by a table near the door, and I could see into her soul, see the hardships of her life before she'd fallen in with her current master. Behind her stern eyes, I could see a mistrust of me. "Mr. Jansen?" she'd asked. "My name is Alina Crowley. Pleased to meet you. I've been asked to direct you to the back. My employer is waiting for you there." "Your employer?" I'd asked. "Malibu?" "She's with my employer," Crowley replied. "Please, come along. I don't want to keep them waiting." She turned to lead me deeper into the club, and I obliged her. The club was not busy, and only a few people watched the act that performed that afternoon. Near the rear corner of the club was a table with 3 women seated at it. The first one, seated in the middle, was a youthful, lovely blonde with sapphire blue eyes, although I swear I saw a shade of pink or purple in them when the light hit them just right. Her hair was curled in an antiquated style, and she wore a midnight black dress with a white fur shawl over her shoulders. She smoked a cigarette in a long holder. Perhaps it was just her style of dress or the way she carried herself, but she struck me as much older than she looked. To her left sat a woman with dark hair and a bob cut and a wry smile. She was dressed in a Red Cross front dress that showed off the pale skin underneath. She had a distinct muscle tone to her. Her scarlet fingernails almost resembled talons, and her eyes seemed to shine crimson when I looked for too long. Like her companion, she also smoked, although she favored a cigarillo with acrid smoke that twisted up from the burning tip. The last woman was the most unusual. Something about her seemed off, but I couldn't quite identify what. Perhaps her eyes were too big, her mouth too narrow, or her cheekbones too high. Her long hair was unnaturally white, and she wore a backless white dress, revealing tattoos of angelic wings on her back. Her eyes were a pale blue that seemed almost gray. Unlike her companions, she did not smoke, but a cup of red wine sat in front of her. There was a spot beside the woman in red for a 4th person, but it was empty. Crowley moved a chair to set it in front of their table before giving a nod to the woman in red. "Ladies, Mr. Jansen is here," she said quietly. "Thank you, Alina. Have a drink on me, will you?" the blonde said. With that, Crowley disappeared. I took the seat she'd offered me, before studying the women before me. Each of them had a strange energy to them, as if they didn't quite fit within this world. The woman in white was the most distracting, but they were all off in their own ways. "Helena Malibu?" I asked. "I'm glad you were willing to accept our invitation," the blonde said. "I was afraid we'd need to come to you instead." "Where are you now?" I asked coyly. "Forgive me for saying, Miss Malibu, but that sounds a little ominous." Malibu offered a gentle smile. "Whether or not it is depends on you," she replied. "Allow me to introduce my sisters, Primrose Kennard and Annette Travis." She gestured to the woman in red and the woman in white, respectively. "Are we waiting for one more?" I asked, looking over at the vacant seat. "No, she will be joining us this evening." Primrose took a long drag on her cigarillo. "Why don't we get down to business?" she asked. I don't suppose you've got any idea why you're here, do you? I didn't. But now I think I can hazard a guess, I replied. Primrose Kennard. That name can't be a coincidence. I've read her grimoire. I recall that she died some centuries ago, but I've heard someone else uses that name these days. I presume you're Shawl? Kennard exhaled smoke through her nostrils, grinning as she did. Read up on your history, have you? She teased. My attention turned to Malibu next. And by that logic, you would be Malvu, or is it Malibu? I've heard many different names. Malibu will suffice for our purposes, she said calmly. I looked over at the last of the women, Annette. You're an odd one, though. You're not the god of creation. I doubt they'd wake her up just to deal with me. Hence the vacant chair. So you must be someone else. The ungod, perhaps? A Nitharith? Why would they bother to include you, though? Annette didn't reply. She took a sip of her wine, displaying zero interest in me. And yet somehow I suspected I was right. Should I be flattered that the ancient gods themselves have invited me out? Or should I be concerned? I asked. We didn't contact you to start a fight, if that's what you're insinuating, Malibu said. Although I should ask that you not take this invitation as approval of your actions either. I only ask that you hear us out. Listen to us, and then you may go on with your little crusade. An appeal. This should have been good. Very well. Speak. You've done well to attain the power you've reached. In all the worlds we've created, few mortals have ever gone that far. But understand that we have taken steps to ensure that such power is difficult to obtain for good reason. Its reckless use has consequences. Consequences? I asked. What have I done that's of any consequence to you? Not to us, Kennard said. To you. Reality is fragile, Malibu continued. While I'll confess I didn't much care for most of the creatures you've killed, some of them were not meant to die by your hand. You've yet to cause any meaningful damage beyond what we can repair, but at the rate you're going, I'm afraid you'll inevitably cross that line. The purpose of this friendly discussion is to ensure that that does not happen. Is that all? I asked before laughing. That's why you called me here? To tell me that you're afraid? What, have I really grown too much for you in such a short span of time? I saw Malibu's eyes narrow. Kennard raised an eyebrow before chuckling. Annette looked at me directly for the first time. Do not forget your place in our presence, she said coldly, and do not question our power or imply we see you as anything less than a worm. Malibu held up a hand to calm her. You mistake my choice in wording for an expression of fear. So let me rephrase. Continue on the path that you're on, and the unnecessary discord you'll cause will necessitate our involvement in your affairs. I'm simply looking to avoid that. Of course you are, I replied. Since when do the gods ever want to be involved? Millions starve in this world. Millions suffer. Millions die. Injustices echo through the pages of history, and yet here you are, sitting in a bar, drinking and smoking while the world burns. You say you're not afraid, but why else would we be having this conversation? Perhaps you're worried that I'll do your job better than you. Is that it? Kennard burst into open laughter. You are just adorable. You think you're the first mortal who's gained a little bit of power and declared themselves the Messiah? You think we didn't do it ourselves eons ago on worlds long since dead? It doesn't work that way. Fix their problems and they'll become dependent. Seize control and they'll beg to be set free. These things require a delicate touch, Malibu said. A gentle push in the right direction. Not something you are equipped to give. I've watched you work, whispering in the ears of your subjects, guiding their hands in the name of, what was it? Corporate synergy? You're hardly as benevolent as you claim. A sorry excuse for a god, Lynette added. You're little more than a scavenger, a parasite feeding off others. No matter what power you've stolen, you remain mortal at heart. You cannot supplant us, and even if you could, the horrors of the void would ruin you. Their tones angered me, the disrespect in it, like scolding parents talking down to a child. I would not let them speak to me this way. So then you admit that you are failures, I snarled. You tried to be gods and you failed, but I will not. You came here to beg me to stop in the form of an ultimatum. Well, I have an ultimatum for you. Stay out of my way, or I'll destroy you just as I destroyed the others. Again, Kennard laughed. She shook her head and wiped a tear from her eye. Oh, I love it. This one's got more balls than brains. Should we go right here, little god? Would you like to see what true divinity looks like? No shall, Malibu said firmly. Think very hard about what you're saying, Mr. Jansen. You are issuing a challenge that will not end well for you. Won't it? I asked. From where I sit, all I hear is the pleading of a coward, looking to keep her throne just a little longer. I'm not entertaining this any further. My ultimatum stands. Stay out of my way, or be destroyed. With that, I rose from my seat to leave. I did not look back. If the gods wish to challenge me, then I will show them the price for their hubris, and I will supplant them, just as I was always destined to do. Excerpt from the Journal of Alden Jansen, Jr., October 23rd, 2021. I have seen into the void. I have stood against the gods. And I see now where I have gone wrong. After they spoke with me, I returned home seething. In my rage, I summoned and slaughtered a few more of the lesser gods. I even attempted to summon Bacchus, the mad god, and Omelia, the deep goddess, as some grimoires indicated that they held places of honor beneath the ancient gods. I had hoped that by killing them, I might spite them further. Yet neither would answer my summons. They, too, must have feared me. Instead, I killed some weak, pitiful creatures to give myself small boosts before deciding that I would achieve nothing by wasting my time. The gods have challenged me. Malibu had challenged me when she sent me that invitation, and I knew it would only be a matter of time until she struck. I told myself it would be wisest not to wait for her to attack, as I imagined she would rely on some cowardly tactic to try and catch me off guard. No, it would be better to travel back into the gloom and confront her directly. Yes, I would slaughter the so-called guardian goddess in her own realm. I would claim it for myself, and from there cast down the rest of the old gods. And then, when Shao and Anithrith had fallen, I would drag Cylia from whatever slumber she was in and rip her apart. I prepared the same ritual I had used before, and it was easier this time. I chose one of my employees as a willing sacrifice. I carved the bones from his corpse with my bare hands and set them upon a pyre to be burned. And just like before, I entered the gloom, clutching the very dagger I had forged in this dead realm. The mist of the gloom welcomed me, curling around me slowly as I set foot upon that sacred ground. I could smell a faint, floral scent in the air, and I knew that I was being watched. "Come out, Malvu," I called. "Face your judgment with dignity." As I spoke, I could see a figure moving through the trees. Something in the shape of a woman, but with the head of a wolf. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Jansen," I heard her say. "This will not end the way you want it to. Turn back. I will not ask you a second time." "You won't have to," I assured her. I spotted the face of the woman I'd seen before between the trees, and I lunged for her, driving my blade into her chest. It should have torn through her, as it had everything else. Instead, it shattered, cracking and bursting into countless shards that seemed to drift away back into the mist they'd once come from. Their touch burned my hands and made me recoil. Malibu kept her eyes trained on me, her head tilted slightly to the side. She had barely reacted to what I'd done. "Did you think you were just going to stab me with a weapon made in my realm, and that would be it?" she asked. I took a step back, my eyes widening in shock. "Even if I could die, you couldn't kill me with anything you forged in here," she said, holding up a hand. I saw the mist swirl through her fingertips, moving almost like a loyal pet. The gloom, the mist, it all belongs to me. It is me. "Then I'll rip it all apart," I cried. In my fervor, I was undeterred. I would destroy her with or without my weapon. I felt the warmth of the power I'd taken radiating from my hands as I tore at her, ripping through her body, and yet she seemed to simply dissipate with every swing, fading into the mist. There was no laughter, no wry remark, only a calm judgment. The mist swirled around the spot where Malibu had been as she faded into nothing. In the blink of an eye, she was gone, and I scanned the area around me, searching for some sign of where she'd gone. The mist seemed to grow thicker around me. Every breath carried a distant smell of lavender. As I tried to see through the gaps in the trees, I swore I saw something moving past me. Bright pink eyes watched me from between the trees. I could hear the sound of something panting. An animal. A wolf. Mist swirled off of its pale coat, making it seem to blend in with the fog around it. It stood almost twice my height and stared me down. There was no rage in its eyes, no spite. It regarded me with simple apathy. Staring at the visage of Malvu before me, I saw now what I had missed in my arrogance. She was not afraid of me. She was barely even annoyed by me. Up until now, this had not been a fight. She was simply studying me. And what she was about to do next was a simple act of discipline. The wolf came for me, charging forward without a sound. I tried to fight back, but there was nothing I could do. Her jaws closed around my torso as she tore me from the ground. I felt her teeth digging into my body. She threw me like I was nothing, launching me several feet away and sending me crashing to the ground in a pile of mangled limbs. I still tried to pick myself up, struggling to breathe as I did. Blood gushed from my new wounds as panic seized hold of me. This was the first time something had wounded me. And the pain. God, the pain. It was worse than anything I had ever felt before. Malibu charged me again. Her jaws closed around my legs as she pressed one paw down on me. I felt her pulling, and I started screaming as she tore me apart. I could feel the flesh being tugged and ripping. I could feel the numbness replace the spots where sensation had once been. She was killing me. Slowly. Purposefully. She was sending me a message. I was not invincible. The wolf stepped away, leaving me to bleed into the dirt. With trembling hands, I tried to crawl, but there was no escape from her. I told you this would not end well for you, I heard Malibu say. You so arrogantly came here to fight, and see where it has left you. She stepped into my view, her form having changed again. Now her body still looked the way it had before, but she still had the head of a wolf. Her eyes were cold and blue as she looked down at me, regarding me with a bitter apathy. She reached down, grabbing me by the hair and lifting me up. Such a greedy thing, so self-assured of your own superiority, so convinced this world would be your apotheosis. You wanted to be like us, and yet you cannot be. You cannot fathom what exists outside within the void. You can barely even stand in our true presence. Would you like to see us as we truly are? Would you like to see everything? I would have begged her not to show me, but I could not form the words. Malibu looked towards the mist beside us. I watched it part, but the gloom was not what waited for us beyond it. What I saw beyond the gloom was only darkness. Malibu dragged me closer to the edge and held me out into the void. I looked. I saw. And I wept. Tears of blood ran down my cheeks as I felt it overwhelm me. I could see the things we were never meant to see. I could see the watching forms of Shawl and Anitharith looming nearby. I could even see the true Malibu, vast and almost impossible to truly see. I remember only the feelings I sensed from her. Not rage, not hate, but disappointment. Such delusions of grandeur. You've brought this on yourself. At last, Malibu pulled me from the void. She hurled me back to the ground where I lay in the dirt, my face smeared with blood and my eyes wide and unblinking. Malibu stared down at me for a moment before she turned away. As she did, I saw other shapes drawing nearer. A great pale bird landed in a nearby tree, looking down at me with blank, white eyes. Crawling up from the earth, I saw an endless crimson centipede begin to make its way towards my body. Shawl and Anitharith come to feast upon my remains. As expected, I heard Anitharith say. But the unchecked pride will make him taste all the sweeter, Shawl crooned. A valiant display. It was entertaining while it lasted, wasn't it? She laughed, and Anitharith gave no response. As they fell upon me, I could do nothing but scream. As I felt Shawl tear through my stomach and dig into my chest, my screams died in my throat. I felt Anitharith's beak
poking through my ribcage. She tore off strips of my flesh while Shawl devoured my innards. For hours, they feasted on me, letting me watch as they ate me alive. It seemed to go on forever, past the point where death should have taken me. And when they were done, when I was nothing but carrion, then the darkness came. I woke up on the ground in my backyard 2 hours ago. My body is whole again. My legs are back. I don't have a mark on me. But I am mortal again. I can feel it. I can feel the change. My godhood has been stripped from me. I do not think I could ever get it back. I realize that I am only alive right now because the gods showed me mercy. They disciplined me and sent me back without that which fed my hubris. I'm sure some would say I should be thankful for that. But I disagree. This was not an act of mercy as one might think of mercy. In the right context, mercy can be the cruelest punishment. They knew what they were doing when they spared me. I don't have a doubt in my mind that they knew exactly what they were doing. I have tasted godhood. I have seen beyond the void. I cannot live the life I lived anymore. I will never sleep again, having seen the things I have seen. And having tasted true power, there is nothing I can do that will give my life purpose. I have a pistol with me here now. This will be my final entry. I know that when I come to her for my judgment, Malibu will simply laugh at me. If she bothers with an audience at all. Perhaps I will simply be cast into the abyss to be devoured by Shawl. I'll be grateful if that's the case.
Are we still here? Are we doing this? Hey, are you awake? Hey, what if I just drew something funny on your face? Shh, be quiet. Don't want to wake you up.
When I was 6 years old, my dad taught me how to turn a sheet of paper into a plane. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I'm sure he regretted it because for a year or so, every floor in the house was covered in these things. I'd peek around corners and throw them at my unsuspecting parents, making plane noises and crash sounds as they hit their marks. When I grew bored of their reactions, I'd turn to tormenting my older sister. She had a lot less patience for it than Mom and Dad, and would try to hurl them back at me with the force of 1,000 suns. That always left me breathless from giggling. And I'd already learned from my experience that they just spun uselessly in the air if you threw them too hard. One day, not long after my 7th birthday, I was alone in my room, kneeling on Buzz Lightyear-themed bedsheets with my tongue between my teeth. I was just finishing an absolute masterpiece of a jet plane, using my crayons to adorn it with racing lines before scrawling a name along its wing that I thought sounded cool. Jetstream. When I declared it finished, I held it aloft and admired my good work. and then jumped to my feet, braced that sucker for takeoff, and let it fly. It soared through the air, tilting this way and that as it skimmed all four walls before crashing somewhere out of sight. I didn't hear any impact. I lunged forward for a better view of the landing site and felt my heart sink. It had sailed straight through the open closet door. Now that cramped space had always terrified me as a boy. Its opening just seemed darker than it had any right to be. I couldn't see where my plane had come to rest beyond the blackened threshold. I was still as a statue, trying to gather up the courage to retrieve it, when the tip of a white paper plane came whooshing out of the void. It flew through a gap in my bed frame and came to rest at my knees. I looked down at it, heart beating furiously. It wasn't my masterpiece. It was a plain, amateurish one, with a small, sad face inked on its wing. A few letters were visible near the center of the plane as well, trailing down into the crease. I gulped and flattened it out. It read simply, pasta. Oddly enough, I was more confused than I was scared, and brought the plane to my father to see what he made of it. Of course, he didn't believe much of what I was saying, dismissing it after hardly a glance. He must have thought I was just trying to get out of pasta night since I'd developed an acute distaste for it. Multitudes of planes followed that first in the years following, though I personally never made another. Sometimes I'd hear them sliding to a halt on my dark bedroom floor at night. Other times, I would flinch as one knocked gently into the side of my head in the middle of the day. They were all branded with either a happy or sad face, and inside each was a prediction of either the immediate future or something that had already occurred. Happy, playing catch with Dad. Happy, takeout night. Sad, grandparents visiting. They ranged from being fairly obvious in their meaning to completely nonsensical, and they almost always included spelling errors. The predictions never extended beyond the scope of my life, and the messages were rarely anything of substance. No one ever seemed to notice the paper planes materializing out of thin air right in front of them. And I learned early on that trying to convince people of the phenomenon was a fruitless effort. They dismissed it entirely and didn't seem at all interested in the pile of discarded planes I was able to show them. Even the most laid back of people would grow visibly upset if I tried pressing the issue. And so, whenever one appeared, I would pick it up, read the message inside, and tuck it out of sight. Over time, it didn't even stand out as being odd anymore. It was just a part of my life. Some days passed without a single plane showing up. Others, I could get half a dozen. Happy. Vacation. That one had led to a family trip to Disneyland. Sad. Broken nose. I remember being 12 years old and frowning at the message in the middle of a football field before the ball struck me square in the face. Happy. Jessica leaving. My sister moved out and I took up residence in her empty room. Happy. She likes you. The plane skidded across the table in front of me as the teacher droned on about covalent bonds. I glanced across the room at a beautiful girl named Emily, meeting her eyes. I asked her out later that day. Sad. Food poisoning. Thanks for letting me know, I complained, stuffing the plane into a bin we kept next to the toilet before lurching forward to hurl for the umpteenth time. You okay? Emily called through the door. I let my wailing speak for itself.
happy. It's a yes. I grinned and reached a hand into my coat pocket, fingers closing around a small velvet cube. And as time went on, the planes seemed to be evolving in complexity. And they were growing more aerodynamic, and the color and quality of paper would occasionally change, as if whatever deity sending them to me was learning. One day, before heading out to work, I stumbled downstairs dizzy from lack of sleep. And I found a small, blue, jet-shaped plane sitting on the kitchen table. It was stamped with a sad face much larger than I'd ever seen before. My hands trembled as I gripped the wings and pulled them apart. He's gone. Dad's funeral was the first I ever attended. I did my best to stay strong for my mom and sister, but it was a feeble front. It hit me hard. Emily was an angel through it all. When I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed, she brought me hot meals and forced me to eat. When I lost my job, she took on more hours to pick up my slack. As horrible as I felt, seeing the burden I was putting on her only made it worse. For her sake, I managed to pick myself up and turn things around. Then, when the world finally seemed brighter again, I felt a tap on my arm and looked down to see a face smiling up from the ground. Pregnant. Emily gave birth to our son Ryan in January of 2020. He was a bubbly little guy, and I loved him with all my heart. And people often stopped Emily and I in the street just to comment on how cute he was. Sometime after Ryan was born, the planes suddenly stopped showing up. For the first few days, I hardly noticed their absence. But as the days turned to weeks, I started to feel uneasy. My wife eventually picked up on it and asked what was bothering me. At the risk of sounding insane, I couldn't help but divulge it all. From my dad teaching me to make paper planes as a child, through to the bizarre phenomena I couldn't explain. The skepticism was written all over her, so I fell to my knees and pulled a shoebox out from under the bed before dumping 100 creased sheets of paper over it. And by the way she reacted, you'd have thought they were spiders. I didn't save all the paper planes I had received, only the important ones. I held up the plane from chemistry class, then the outcome of my proposal. I even found the prediction of my broken nose and showed it to her, pointing to my crooked bridge. I could tell she was resisting a strong urge to divert her gaze from the messages. Emily knew me to be a rational man, and I was never the type to make up something like this, and it certainly wouldn't have made for a very good joke. She tried her best to believe me, but it was as if it was painful for her to think about. Eventually, she grew angry with me, the same as everyone else I tried showing them to, and cussed me from the room. She hugged me gently from behind while I was doing the dishes a little later that evening, apologizing profusely and telling me that she hadn't a clue what came over her. She didn't say a word about the paper planes, though. Emily fell violently ill that night, and she ended up being wheeled into an emergency room, having me cradling an upset Ryan in my arms. The doctors couldn't tell me what was wrong with her. It felt like a knot was growing in the pit of my stomach as I put together a sickening theory. A large paper plane rounded the corner at the end of the hall, soaring serenely toward us and coming to rest at my feet. My mouth was dry as I pressed it open with my foot. She's gone. After Emily's passing, I sent Ryan off to live with my mom for a while. She was afraid I was going to do something stupid, but I promised it wasn't anything like that. I didn't have the capacity to care for myself at the time, much less a child. I took the opportunity to rid my house of its furnishings, burning it all in a colossal pile in the backyard with a shoebox full of paper planes sitting snug at its center. And only when I was absolutely certain that not a single shred of paper remained in the place did I finally begin redecorating. My phone was constantly alight with calls from concerned family members in the time following. And it was impossible to convince them that I genuinely was doing pretty well, all things considered. Ridding myself of the planes had been a cathartic experience, and I still had Ryan to think about. All that mattered was keeping him happy and safe. On the 3-month anniversary of Emily's death, I finally felt ready to visit him. Mom opened the door with a warm smile, holding my son in one arm and pulling me into a tight embrace with the other. Jessica was in the living room, lying on her side and surrounded by an assortment of toys. "Looks like Ryan's been keeping you busy," I said. "Just a bit." She climbed to her feet to give me a hug. "We're lucky Mom kept all of our old toys." "Speaking of," Mom said from the entranceway, "where did he find that?" She gestured to Ryan, who was now scurrying around the floor on all fours. I followed her outstretched finger and felt my breath catch in my throat. I recognized exactly what it was that he clutched in his tiny fist. Those racing lines, colored as vivid as the day I made them, and the wonky text scrawled across the side that read, "Jetstream." It was, without a shadow of a doubt, my old masterpiece. Screams filled the room when Ryan collapsed limp on the carpet, red tears running down his chubby cheeks. As Jessica and my mom raced to his side, I had eyes only for the discarded plane that rolled from his loosened grip. I stared at the giant face spanning both its wings, the face I hadn't given it. The mouth was curled up into a smile. I never had coulrophobia before the night encountering the clown with no face. Clowns were a big part of my childhood. Soul, Krusty, Lunette and her doll Molly, Ronald McDonald, hell, It was my favorite horror book and movie growing up. It's funny how life can take something that you loved and turn it into a horror-fueled nightmare. The Jasper School of Arts is where my love turned into a gut-wrenching phobia. I had a phase in my early 20s, like a lot of people, where I was obsessed with urban exploring and photography. I ventured out and photographed a lot of decrepit buildings during that time, so when my friend Jeff told me about an abandoned school that had a room dedicated to the art of clowning, I couldn't pass it up. Jeff told me how when they closed the school, they just left the classroom the way it was, and it made for wonderful pictures. It wasn't far from where I lived, so my girlfriend and I packed up and made our way over there to scout it out. The ashy gray building was nestled in a little forest off the highway. The smashed windows and broken door added a certain creepy aesthetic to the place. And even though the night was beginning to descend fast, we noticed that no one was around, so probably wasn't guarded. At least, not too heavily. Taking a few photos outside, we decided to venture in to find this room. As we entered the broken door, leaves and dirt that were scattered across the floor crunched under our feet. Pulling up my camera, I began taking shots of the graffiti lining the walls. Most were generic, sprawling words and names, or some form of edgy 666s and satanic imagery. But littered throughout were giant murals of clowns in different poses. Some of the clowns were leaning or sitting on invisible walls or boxes. Some were dancing, and some even had little balls they were balancing on. It was breathtaking, save for one thing. All the clowns seemed to be missing a face. I honestly chalked this up to the artist maybe being terrible at faces, but a little unease tensed in my stomach at the sight. After a few more shots, we turned on our flashlights and moved through the building. The graffiti thinned out, but that faceless clown was on every single wall, as if beckoning us towards the room. Opening up some doors on the way showed pretty basic classrooms or offices, but not what we were looking for. After about 20 minutes of walking around the deserted campus, we came across a set of double doors. The giant, faceless clown was painted across them with the hand reaching out as if telling us to come in. A plaque affixed beside the door confirmed it. Clowning Arts. My girlfriend was hesitant, asking me to turn around and leave because it was now dark and she could feel the unease gripping her stomach. I offered for her to stay outside the doors while I went in and explored, which she reluctantly agreed. Opening one of the doors, I entered the room alone. Shining my flashlight around, I noticed there were no windows, so with the door closed, there would be absolutely no light without my flashlight. I began to look around at my surroundings. Big racks of dusty, colorful costumes filled one side of the wall, opposite a bunch of cobweb-infested wigs. A bunch of props were strewn across the floor, leading up to a giant mirror in the back, with a long plastic table that had makeup littered across it. This was a gold mine, and got me excited about the pictures I would get. After taking a few pictures and checking some of the items out, I got a bright idea. I turned off my flashlight, so I was draped in pitch black, and set the flash. Each time I hit the button, the room was blasted with light, casting eerie shadows in all sorts of directions. Carefully walking around so as not to hit any objects, I came in front of the clothes rack. I snapped a picture, the bright flash lighting up the vibrant colors of the clothes. As the light began to extinguish, I saw for a second just a shadow between two parted costumes. I snapped again to try to check what I saw, and there seemed to be a bright red wig popping out. Fascinated by this, I did it again. But nothing was there, and the clothes weren't parted. I ignored the nervousness beginning to grow inside me, thinking it was just the dark playing tricks on me. But as I stood there in the pitch black, the anxiety got the better of me. I dropped the camera so it swung around my neck by the strap and reached into my pocket to grab my flashlight. I tried to turn it on, but the light wouldn't shine. I flipped the switch on and off, smacking it against my hand, but nothing worked. Frustrated, I put it back away and began to leave. But with all the thoughts swirling in my head and the brick in the pit of my stomach, I couldn't figure out where the door was in the pitch black. I started taking pictures to have the flash go off so I could see my way. I found I was in the opposite corner from the door. How I got there, I still don't know. I turned around and began making my way to the exit, taking pictures every few steps. I'd only gotten about 2 feet when I saw it again. The red hair sticking out from behind the table. As I moved forward at my slow pace, I kept the flash transfixed on that spot as a figure started to rise. I moved faster, taking pictures less frequently to not see what was happening. Unfortunately, I kept bumping into and tripping on things, so I couldn't stop the flash altogether. Eyes transfixed on this thing rising every time I had a light. I tried to keep a large berth. Most rational people would assume it was something just playing a trick on me, but I did not believe it then, and still don't believe that now. As I reached the midway point of the room is when the clown fully emerged. Before me stood the most grotesque sight. My eyes ignored the blood-red hair and striped costume and went straight for its face, or lack thereof. Where this clown's face would be was a giant crater of bloody, gnarled tissue. Maggots wiggled inside, causing puke to build up in my throat. It was still able to give off a deep, eerily happy chuckle from the hole. I leapt back, falling to the ground as my flashlight tumbled to the ground, seeming to fix the issue it had earlier and illuminating the clown. I scrambled back, smacking into the wigs behind me, causing spiders to shake loose and fall on my head and shoulders. I quickly brushed my head as the clown danced towards me, laughing, a throaty, eerie laugh. I screamed, which caused the clown to stop and look at me intuitively. It raised its hand to where its right eye would have been and mimicked wiping away tears, but instead splattered blood and maggots on the ground. We stared at each other for a good 30 seconds before banging jostled us out of our stare-off. We both looked at the door as it was pushed open. My girlfriend stood there, her mouth agasp. Knowing I had to protect her, I scrambled towards the door. The clown was close behind me as we ran, and I could hear the smack of his oversized shoes close behind me, accompanied by the splashes and liquid and that now familiar laugh. I yelled at my girlfriend to start running as I was mere feet from the door, and she complied. I was so close, but at the last possible second, a searing pain erupted on my bicep, and I was spun around. As the creature faced me, it let out the loudest laugh yet, spraying its disgust right into my eyes as I slid out of the threshold. It took me a second to realize I had hit the ground and wiped the blood from my eyes so I could see. When I looked at the double doors, there was no sign of the faceless clown, and the doors seemed to be slowly shutting. As I looked at my bicep, as it still seemed to burn, the large outline of the clown's hand seemed to be seared into my flesh. As I got up and began to run through the corridors, all the faceless clown murals seemed to be echoing that creepy laugh, mocking me as I left the building. So, if you ever come across the Jasper School of Arts, please do not enter that building, and especially do not go looking for the faceless clown. As fun as it might sound, the only thing I have from that night is a permanent burn on my arm and a lifelong phobia of something I once loved.
Oh my god, is that the time? Whew. Alright, well I guess we better get ready to wrap things up here soon, huh?
I work for NASA as an astronomer, and there are certain things that we keep hidden from the public. No, the Earth isn't flat, and aliens don't control the government. Fuck. I wish those were the case, as the truth is much, much worse. In 1993, the Hubble Space Telescope saw a star disappear. It didn't go supernova or die naturally. It simply went dark over the span of a few minutes. Now, the star was already too faint to see with the naked eye, and ground-based telescopes had trouble picking it out from among the surrounding stars, so the event wasn't widely known to the public. At the time, we thought the most likely explanation was that a cloud of interstellar dust had drifted between Earth and the star, occluding it from view. It was noted and mostly forgotten about. In 2007, 2 more stars vanished. Now, due to the circumstances of this event, this was much more concerning. The 2 stars in question were part of a binary system, orbiting each other at a fairly close distance. If a cloud of interstellar dust was the culprit again, they would have both seemed to disappear simultaneously, or very close to it. Instead, both stars faded individually over a period of minutes, separated by a span of 8 hours. Now, this binary system was also about 15 light years closer to Earth than the star that had previously disappeared in 1993. And after carefully reviewing millions of Hubble images, 2 more stars were identified which had gone out in the years 1995 and 2002. These were all in the same stellar neighborhood, only a handful of light years from each other. The only conclusion we could draw was that some unknown influence, traveling close to the speed of light, was shrouding or destroying these stars. Unfortunately, the Hubble wasn't sensitive enough to tell us any more than that. The James Webb Space Telescope first came online a few months ago. Now, although official channels will tell you that it's still undergoing testing, we have been actively collecting data since early February. And one of the first things we did was to aim the telescope at the regions of space occupied by the vanished stars. If they were being blocked by dust clouds, a hope some of us still held on to, the increased sensitivity of the JWST may have been able to see through them and confirm that the stars were still there. Unfortunately, we had no such luck. The first 3 stars that had disappeared were still completely dark. Gravitational wave detectors, though, soon found something odd. In all cases, not only were the stellar masses still present, but the amount of mass had actually increased. And more sensitive observations had also detected a type of string or web stretching through space, connecting these now invisible stars. And when we trained the telescope on the binary system that had vanished in 2007, which was the nearest point at which this phenomenon had been so far observed, there was finally enough ambient EM spectrum radiation left to try a mass spectrometer reading. Now, if you're not aware, mass spectrometry is an incredibly useful process whereby measuring the patterns of light wavelengths emitted or reflected by an object, we can learn tons of useful information, such as its temperature, speed, and direction of movement, and chemical composition. The readings we got from the binary stars didn't make any sense, though. I mean, first of all, they were cold. Almost as cold as the surrounding interstellar medium. Whatever had happened to these stars had snuffed them out completely, or somehow prevented their light from escaping. What was truly puzzling, however, were the emission lights returned by the mass spectrometer. Several familiar elements such as hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium were identified, but these were few and far between. Most of the readings didn't correspond to any known chemical elements, and even seemed to defy what we knew about the physics of light, matter, and chemistry. This massive star-spanning structure was primarily composed of materials that we didn't even have names for. and may not have even been matter as we understand it. Speculation ran rampant. I mean, obviously, such a thing couldn't be a natural phenomenon. Finally, we had proof of extraterrestrial life. But what was this thing we had discovered, and for what purpose was it being built? The leading hypothesis was that we were looking at a series of Dyson shells, massive solar collectors built to completely envelop stars in order to capture 100% of their energy output. Such a concept had been envisioned in the early 20th century as a potential source of energy for an interstellar civilization. And ever since then, the idea had found its way into popular science fiction. The construction of these massive structures had actually been theorized to be one of the first signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life that we may someday detect. And it seemed that day was today. Now, the theory still didn't explain everything, though. I mean, first of all, there was the impossible speed at which the stars were covered. Constructing a Dyson shell from scratch in a matter of minutes was beyond even the wildest speculations of scientists and sci-fi writers. Then there were the mysterious filaments that connected the shells over distance of light years. No one had any idea what purpose these could serve or how they could have been built. Everyone at NASA was fascinated by this mystery, and in hindsight, we may have been better off if we had never discovered the truth. Less than a month ago, the JWST detected a series of unusual energy bursts emanating from interstellar space. These were occurring at the very edge of a star system, approximately 12 light years from the binary system that vanished in 2007. As we focused the telescope on the system, we soon determined that these were not natural phenomena either. The energy signatures, which were still flashing intermittently, matched what would be expected from thermonuclear and antimatter-based explosions, along with several other types of energies that we couldn't identify. These explosions, although still not visible to the naked eye on Earth from that distance, were absolutely tremendous in magnitude. I mean, easily billions of times more powerful than any nuke that humanity could conceivably build. After experimenting with the telescope settings, we were able to get a clearer picture of what was going on. The tip of one of the interstellar filaments that linked the Dyson system was passing through the Oort cloud of the distant star system, approaching its sun. And whoever lived there was fighting back. Their weapons were able to slow the thing's advance, shattering, breaking off, and vaporizing planet-sized chunks of the object. But it seemed to be rebuilding itself almost as fast as it was being destroyed. After less than a week, the explosion stopped. It seemed that they had run out of ammunition. In the void between stars, we knew that these things traveled at nearly the speed of light, but as we watched it approach the inner star system, its pace slowed as it swelled in size, preparing to devour the system's star. We quickly trained the telescope's mirrors on the doomed sun. We were about to watch whatever this thing was blot out another star, but in real time. We all held our breath as we watched the projected image of the main sequence star, slightly larger than our own sun. At first, nothing seemed to be happening, but soon a small shadow appeared on the edge of the luminous orb, soon followed by another shadow, and then a third. The shadows began to converge, forming a strange yet somehow familiar pattern as they blocked out the star's light. "What are those?" one of my colleagues gasped. They almost look like... She paused, as if afraid to say the next word for fear of ridicule. I, however, had no such hesitancy. "Leaves," I said, my voice monotone. The situation was far too incredible to express any emotional reaction, even that of pure shock. "They look like leaves." We watched as, over a period of minutes, a web of shadowy outlines matching the familiar shapes of oblong leaves with thin veins proceeded to blot out the remaining light from the distant star. By that point, everyone in the room had realized the truth. The phenomenon we had been tracking for so many years wasn't some hyper-advanced alien megastructure. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium, some of the few familiar elements we had detected, they were all components of chlorophyll. It was a plant. An enormous plant that spanned across light years. And much like terrestrial plants, it sought out light to fuel itself. The filaments connecting the stars across interstellar space were stems, branches. It would grow in the direction of the nearest stars it sensed, completely enveloping them and then moving on. Any life inhabiting planets orbiting those stars would be left to freeze to death, or perhaps even worse. It was possible that the plant would devour those planets to add to its mass as well. Everyone was silent as the telescope continued to gather data. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, a young astronomer spoke up from the far end of the room, addressing our supervisor. "Sir, we've begun to detect the formation of another tendril, leaving the system. Its vector is..." He gulped. He didn't need to say any more, but he did anyway. "It's heading directly for our sun." "How much time do we have?" the supervisor replied grimly. "Judging by the time lag, distance, relativistic properties, and previously observed speeds of this thing, I'd estimate no more than 27 years, sir." 27 years. We had just watched this galactic weed overwhelm a civilization that was, at the very least, thousands of years ahead of us in technology. And we had less than 3 decades. I'll probably be found and silenced for posting this, but I don't care. I have to tell someone. I can't keep this a secret any longer. I mean, when the sun turns black and the whole world begins to freeze, at least you'll have some idea of what's going on. Small comfort it may be.
Well, my darling deviants, it seems this is the end of our sleepover. I've got work in the morning, and I can only handle so much gossip and mayhem for one night. Let's do this again sometime, shall we? But I really need you to work on your snoring. I mean, there were parts that were abysmally impossible to hear over your nasal symphony. I'll bring some nose plugs or something. It'll be a good time. Anyways, good night, my ghastly gang, and stay spooky.